muted. I'm ready when you are.
I hear that.
I think you're leprous. Okay.
For the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, crowd. The 5 minutes now for topics from the floor. They're not on the public hearing agenda. What?
Minutes.
Oh, we don't have it on the agenda. Oh, yeah, no, it's topics from the floor. Anybody have topics from the floor that you not on the agenda? All right. All I do is motion's been made, the second for approving the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Moving right along. Okay, start the first hearing. Now 7:01, the public hearing is now open. This is the quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for a planned development. Project.
7:05.
Wrong.
Also, I don't think it's 7:05.
The variance is the.
7:05 is variance.
I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Yes. Wrong one. Yeah, but you don't have the script.
No, I don't. But I do have the 7:30.
There it is. I'm sorry.
Started.
Okay.
I never want to share.
Somebody you can give a comment.
What's the first here now?
The talk minutes.
Well, I'll figure out the script from here. All right. Start it again. The time is now 7:02 p.m. The public hearing is now open. It's a quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of the hearing is a request for a variance. The subject property is identified on the county assessor's map as lot 900 on map 4 and 1W 3DB. The applicant is Jay Eichnernock. Eichnernock, I'm sorry about that. The owner is Jeanette Nelson. Because quasi judicial proceedings require the observance of certain procedural formalities, we will take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. The three members of the commission wish to declare an ex parte conflict of interest or bias in this matter. None? Does anyone in the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? None. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows: required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and decision. The following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to the city code and ORS 197.7635. The following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. St. Helens Municipal Code 17.108.0801. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria described or other criteria of the plan, such as the comprehensive plan or land use regulations, such as that found in the development code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Ability to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue, and precludes an action for damages in the circuit court. All right, staff report.
Thank you, Chairman. So tonight we're looking at a setback variance, and this map shows kind of where we're at. So this is South Second Street, just south of Tualatin. You might know this area by the salt staircase that goes down to the St. Helens owned property near site down below. So this is the block we're looking at today. The subject property then right here, where my cursor is. So on this property in 2008, the city approved a demolition permit for an existing single-family dwelling, and then shortly after approved the building permit for reconstruction of a dwelling at about the same footprint on that property. At that time, it had a rear setback of 10 feet, which is the appropriate setback for this zoning district, residential. And also at that time, because this is on South Second, it was reviewed under our scenic resource review chapter, which reviews new development over 15 feet in height or 2 stories, which this development is. So at both of those times, the setback was 10 feet. So more recently, we received a building permit for work unrelated to this deck that we're going to talk about a little bit later, and noticed that there was this plan, and it showed the existing deck right up to the property line. So it had a 0 rear yard setback. So sometime between 2008 and now, a deck was built and it didn't comply with the approved permits we had on file for the site. The deck wasn't built by the current owner today, so Jay will give testimony. He didn't build this deck. He bought the house more recently than that. And so now we are trying to bring this home up into compliance and review it with this setback. So like with all variances, we go through the criteria, and the applicant did provide a narrative and then some staff comments throughout the staff report. So I'll highlight the ones I think that are of relevance. So the first criteria talks about detriment to surrounding properties. So I'm going to pull back up our GIS just to kind of show the surrounding area. So the property to the north has a deck at basically the same footprint as the subject property that we're looking at. So it has a similar reduced footprint. And this property to the south also goes up to and maybe even encroaching onto the city property with their deck. So there's precedence along this block that utilize every bit of that yard space. Obviously, it's got amazing views of the river. It makes sense that they would want to utilize that area. So as far as detriment to the abutting neighbors, arguably, you know, they're under the same circumstance. And so that's what staff notes under that criteria. There's also some photos from the deck where you can kind of see the alignment of the deck that's built looking over to the deck there. So you can see those in the staff report. So there's also no visual impact to any other neighbors on South Second. You can see the deck from anybody in the surrounding apartment residential zoning district. You obviously can see the deck from the city-owned property, and there's some photos of what that looks like. You know that there's a 60-foot drop-off between this property and the city-owned property down below. And so if you look at the next criteria, I talk about how in other zoning districts, that difference in topography can actually be used as a setback. So in Holton and in the Plaza sub-district for the Riverfront district, it says that when you have uses that are more than 30 feet above proposed commercial uses, then the height of the topography counts as part of the setback. So for example, if you have a 35-foot bluff behind a commercial building, it's the same as having a 35-foot setback. And so that doesn't directly apply in this case, but it gives the commission a way to look at great differences in topography in terms of setback requirements. So you may not have a horizontal setback, but you have a huge vertical setback. And so I think that can be determined as a unique circumstance to this property that couldn't apply to other properties, which is what a variance can do. As I noted before, They're not proposing to modify the size of this deck as part of their proposal with the building permit. They're just trying to permit what's already built today. So that meets the criteria that this variance isn't self-imposed, he didn't build it, and that it's also the minimum necessary to alleviate the hardship. So those are the things I wanted to highlight in the staff report. I know we have the applicant here, but I will answer any questions.
Existing plans that the city approved, smaller deck.
Yeah, they approved a 10-foot rear setback.
What is the code section that would allow us to grant the variance? The same code.
17-108-0501.
Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, it's in the staff report.
17.108.0501.
Find it.
Yeah, it's on page 2. Right here.
Thank you.
One thing I would note on this GIS aerial shot is the buildings and property lines, or the property lines in the aerial photo aren't quite aligned. So they're not, for example, that close to the front property line.
Yeah,
They're a little skewed there, so.
Runoff doesn't start at that back line.
it does. It's right about here. Yeah, so basically this deck is shifted. This aerial image is quite awful, honestly. But it does show that this is in line with other neighboring decks. That was the purpose of bringing it up. Yeah. And also that those 3 properties are the only properties on the east side of South Second. So there's not a whole lot of impact to surrounding neighbors because it's only 2. Any other questions before we ask the applicant? Great. The applicant, would you like to give a presentation?
Minor, I think you did an excellent job, Jennifer. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. My wife and I moved to St. Helens in November and very excited about living in the community and what you have planned for the waterfront. This house was a treasure for us to find. And as Jennifer indicated, we had no idea that the deck encroached on the property line, assumed that once we applied for a building permit to build out a vacant basement that this wouldn't come up. So lo and behold, here we are. I might add from those pictures, not are they not really revealing the truth, but my neighbor to the north and south, I would argue if you went out there, not only is their deck on the property line, but their house is on the property line. So if I'm encroaching by a deck, that they're slightly more egregious, and I'm not here to defame them. I'm just trying to put it into context. The view is spectacular. I've met both people. They saw the variance report. They encouraged and were excited for us to be in the neighborhood. So I appreciate your consideration.
Questions of the applicant? Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Is there anyone that wants to testify in support of the application? Anyone that would like to have a neutral testimony, either in favor or against? Anyone who would like to testimony in opposition to the application? All right. No further questions to the commission. No further responses to staff. The public record is closed. The matter is returned to the table for deliberations and oral discussion.
We can add a little bit of context. So this home was approved, the tear down and stuff, that was back in 2008 or so, maybe 9. So it was some time ago, and at that time, the way inspections were done differently At that time, the building department did the inspections and planning did not do inspections. And this isn't the only time that I've seen a deck that's made me go, huh, this is interesting. We actually had some houses on Snow Street in the Ridgecrest subdivision that had these decks that got really close to a protected area that weren't on the original plans, and anyways, it was kind of messy. So we do inspections with the building department now. So you could argue that it was kind of a messy way of doing things at the time.
The staff's recommendation in the report is approval. The two conditions are that it's limited for a limited time. I think that doesn't really apply in this case since it's already built. And then just a general boilerplate condition about compliance with the development code. There's not a whole lot of conditions. The deck's built.
But it needs to be rebuilt.
So it depends if it was fully destroyed or if they're just maintaining the existing structure. So, want to clarify your question?
Well, I'm just wondering, I've seen it where it's approved, but if it ever needs to be rebuilt, then they.
Yeah, if it were ever fully destroyed, they would have to go through this process again to build it at the same footprint, but likely, you know, the owners would maintain over time, so that wouldn't be required.
Make a motion, we approve the variance.
Not clear here. Is this something that we are deciding?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
do we have a motion for me to sign?
So moved.
Favor?
Aye.
Fine.
All right. Extra both options, so. Oh, I have to read one, sorry. The final written decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the city council. The notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who testified or submitted comments. The appeal deadline will be included. Okay. Now I got the right script, for the right thing. It is now 7:17 p.m. The public hearing is now open. It's a quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for a planned development. The subject property is identified in the county assessor's map as lot 700 on map 5 and 1W33. The applicant is North 8th Street LLC. The owner is the same. Quasi judicial proceedings require certain procedural formalities. We'll take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an ex parte conflict of interest or bias in this matter?
I'm not gonna declare a bias, but I'm gonna declare that I applied to be a member of the Elks Lodge and this has not come up. And I'm not gonna declare a bias, but I'm gonna state that I don't think it's gonna affect me in any way.
I have to state a potential bias. I'll make sure that the applicant is okay with me being part of the. I work for the Oregon Department of State Lands. I'm a Aquatic Resource Coordinator for Columbia County. And I approved a permit for this project. Bill law. So if the applicant would rather I step down, I can do that. The applicant but concerned about conflict of any. I'll only address things that are part of this application and deal with city activities.
No, I don't.
All right. I'm happy to step down. We know a lot about this project. I'm happy to help the council with that. But my comments to this application for the city. Thank you. So does anyone else from the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? I guess I'll continue. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows: required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, Those in favor of the application, neutral testimony. Those opposed, rebuttal by applicant. Final questions? Close the record, deliberations and decision. Following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to the city code ORS 197.7635. Following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. St. Helens Municipal Code 17.08.040, quasi judicial and standards. St. Helens Municipal Code 17.1, 40.060, plan development allowed and disallowed. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria as described or other criteria in the plan, such as the comprehensive plan or land use regulations, such as that found in the development code the person believes applies to the decision. To raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority and up to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA and the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue, and precludes an action for damages and circuit court. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So obviously tonight, we're going to be talking about the subdivision, but this first public hearing, this one that we're doing right now, pertains to an overlay zone. And so we won't get into the nitty-gritty of the subdivision until the public hearing that follows this one. So I just want everybody to understand that, and that'll make a little bit more sense as we go along. And I say a little bit more because it's very abstract, this planning stuff. Just bear with us.
So Jacob, can you just clarify, since there's so many documents here, then we're looking at the statute as overlay zone in parentheses on the
Yes, you are looking,
packet here.
you're looking for the packet that is well less than an inch thick. Yeah, the smaller report, yes. So this is the planned development overlay zone. That's what this hearing is about. And what this does is it amends our zoning map. So it creates this new layer on top of the zoning map, which allows certain development flexibilities. And this decision, which is actually a recommendation to the city council, because any kind of amendment like that has to be approved by the legislative body. So this is a recommendation because it'll amend the zoning map. So we have a property that's very close to being 24 acres in size, and it's peppered with wetlands. There are some associated files with the subdivision and stuff, which we'll look at the next hearing. It is undeveloped, it's vacant currently. And so we have to look at some of the standards to consider allowance of this planned development overlay for this property. It's more than 2 acres, so we can check that box. There's a variety of standards that apply to efficiency of land, the most feasible approach to developing and stuff like that. And really the flexibilities that this planned development overlay provides as far as lot size, lot dimensions, things like that, it really is an essential tool for this project to pencil. And I can personally attest to this. We've been meeting on this property since at least 2017, maybe 2016. So it's been the saga that we've kind of witnessed, and the last rendition looked like this. It was this continuous pullback, and so it was this point where it was my recommendation. Okay, you got to do a plan development. That's what you got to do. And our plan development overlay is a very important tool when we have properties encumbered with wetlands like this. In the history of St. Helens, at least in the last couple decades, we haven't seen any of these plan development overlays since the Great Recession, except the first one we've seen since then was for the Forest Trail subdivision. That was the run that Rich Bailey did on Sykes. And if you recall, that one had a significant chunk of wetland out of it. In that case, it was one wetland, it wasn't a bunch. Now, we're showing this as an example for the purposes of the plan development overlay. The plan, because you're amending the zoning map, the overlay stays. So it's possible that, let's say the subdivision gets approved. And then in 2 weeks, the applicant's like, you know what? I'm tired of this. I don't care anymore. And just throws it away and the property sits idle and the approval elapses. The overlay zone remains. And so someone could utilize that overlay zone, the flexibilities it provides for a different development. And so that's an important thing to recognize. The overlay zone sticks. It could be for the development proposed like this or another one proposed under it. And that's why we're reviewing these separately. So as far as our comprehensive plan, if we can go to the next slide, I believe is zoning, yes, perfect. So the majority of the site is that dark brown color, and that's mobile home residential. And our comprehensive plan has a comparable designation. And so the one thing that we kind of considered in looking at this overlay zone, we don't have a lot of mobile home residential in town. In fact, there's only 2 properties with such a designation. The 2/3 of this property and then the Crestwood manufactured home park to the north, which you can see with all the buildings within its perimeter there. So we do have a stipulation that any development under the plan development overlay not preclude manufactured homes. And that's a pretty low bar. You're not saying that you have to have manufactured homes, it just cannot preclude them through design standards or things like covenants, which say they are impossible. So that's the one kind of extra condition, if you will, we have in this. I recommended it, so I have to support it. And it really makes sense. It's this kind of property is the reason why we have these rules. And that's why I recommend approval with the condition that it does not preclude manufactured homes. The other thing I want to note, one of the important bases for allowing this is the wetland encumbrances. And this is the approved wetland delineation from the Division of State Lands. And you can see there's, quite a bit of wetland complex on the east side. And as you saw with that proposed plan, a lot of that's being preserved. But you do have wetlands on the other side too, that have to be mitigated. And so just a lot of wetlands going on. It makes sense to have that overlay so someone can have an economic use of their property. Because this is an overlay zone, I know there's always temptation to want to talk about the streets and the lots and all that stuff. But remember, this is a zoning map decision, not the subdivision decision itself. And that's what I got.
Questions of staff at this point, what you said, applicant?
I have one question. So, Jacob, the concern of precluding mobile homes, that would not be allowed.
That's correct. So what that means is that overlay zone enables us to apply flexibilities. And if it was approved as recommended, it would be the caveat that we want to make sure it doesn't preclude manufactured homes. And so any development, be it this one or development B in 2 years, we would need to check that box.
So spot zoning or something like
You could consider it like that. This land was kind of set aside for that purpose. And it would be kind of like washing away the spot, I guess. So yeah, you could consider it akin to spot zoning.
That's what I kind of got from you.
Yeah.
Thank
Did
you.
you, could you clarify, what the planned development overlay zone allows them to do differently than the zoning that it is right now?
Sure,
Be
yeah.
clear on that.
And so they have a table that kind of shows some of that. And this summarizes it really well. And the main thing I would focus on is the standard on the very left. And then the second column from the right is the plan development allow flexibility. And where it says yes, it does. Where it says no, it doesn't. So minimum lot size, they could pick a minimum lot size less than the normal standard, which would be 5,000 square feet. They could say, well, there is no minimum lot size, or they can pick a smaller number. Same with the lot dimensions. And yard requirements. Now, there are some things that cannot be exempted, and a critical one, and one that an applicant needs to think about their final product, is lot coverage. That maximum lot coverage cannot be amended, and so you don't want to create extraordinarily small lots where you're still subject to that 40% lot coverage, and you're gonna have not just a tiny home, but a super tiny home.
Are we then on this one, doing the manufactured home zoning with R7 on 4 of it, or are we just the overlay?
This is the overlay.
Okay.
Yeah, so the underlying zoning stays the same. We're adopting the overlay, and these standards here, I mean, it's what they're proposing.
Right, I read those.
But if this project didn't make it, or they just gave up on it, someone else came in, they could apply their own set of standards as allowed by the plan development overlay.
So Jacob, the example of the plan that we're not talking about yet shows not full use of the property. There's a lot of open space. Doesn't a plan unit development require some open space? You can cram all together here. You have to have some open space from another part of the property. Is that how that works?
Well, the city of St. Helens, in its older version of the plan development standards, there was some mandatory minimum open space. And you've encountered some of that because we still deal with those old decisions. Meadowbrook is a good example that we've dealt with recently. It was approved under those old standards. So this one doesn't have a minimum open space explicitly, although in the state's definition of plan development, it says, usually there's this open space associated with it. But it's common for us, because it's a good tool for properties encumbered with wetlands, that the wetlands end up being that open space.
Are you saying that with the overlay, we're basically deleting other requirements of setbacks and minimum lot square footage to
You are enabling a developer
make that decision?
to make that decision. Yeah, so you could adopt the overlay, and let's say, they walk away, someone else comes in and says, I don't want those flexibilities, I don't want to use it. Then it just sits there, but it does enable those flexibilities as highlighted in this table. And an important thing to consider is density. And that's a very important tool that this plan development overlay allows, is when you have all this encumbered area to try to meet a reasonable density based on that. In this case, their density calculations show over 100 lots possible, Cause there's there's the wetlands, but then there's all that non-wetland area in between the wetlands. That, if you're just doing a calculation is fine, but to work around the wetlands, you'd have to impact them. Without that, they wouldn't get very close to even the density proposed.
Any questions of staff? Let's hear from the applicant.
Good evening, folks. Good to be here in person and see everybody. I won't get into too much detail. My name's Andrew Neamy with Lower Columbia Engineering.
And I'm Chase with Lower Columbia Engineering.
I think I did a great job describing the proposed the application. The only thing I'd elaborate on there, I'll try to refrain from getting into the details of the next hearing, but Jacob's point about the densities, we haven't been involved in this project throughout its duration. But when we stepped in, it was in a transition previously with the required joint permit application process to allow impacts and work around the wetlands on the site. It was realized that the density that was previously proposed was too aggressive. It was going to have even a short version of a long drawn out process and complex process. But in quick summary is that the previous density was really going to be hard to permit at the state and federal level. And so based on, Jacob, to my understanding, bringing up this option with the overlay zone, that afforded us the ability to have a bit more flexibility to minimize the impacts to those wetlands. So basically regroup, come up with a proposal with less overall density through this overlay zone option that would allow for less impacts to those wetlands, which I think is a win-win. In my opinion, it makes the property pencil out as feasible for improvements and striking that balance between utilizing the property, but also minimizing those impacts to the existing wetlands. I'll stick around here in case you have any technical questions.
This is the applicant.
All right.
Thank you. Testimony in support of the application. You want to hear that has neutral testimony, you're not in favor, you're not against, but testimony you want.
I have someone on Zoom.
Neutral testimony?
Yes. Andrew, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, I was able to. My question is more of an infrastructure question than anything else. The septic that's going to be used for this proposal, is that septic going to be tapped into 240 Madrona Court? And if so, what is the lift station capability and the overflow capability or plan, contingent plan, considering that you would be adding this many lots to this development?
So Andrew, that's a better comment for the next hearing.
Okay, didn't know, sorry.
Zoning overlay, there's nothing to do with sewers.
Okay, thank you.
We'll make sure to address
Talk
that.
to you later.
Thanks, Andrew.
Everyone else have neutral testimony relating to this overlay? Okay, anybody is in opposition to the application would like to testimony? This is in opposition to adding this overlay zone on the current zoning to allow this flexibility of open development.
I got a concern about what I see.
Can you come up here and state your name, please?
My name is Fred Adams. I live on 8th Street. From what I see on the drawing is everything's gonna be filtered through all the traffic through 8th and 9th Street. 50 some odd additional units out there, and all that traffic is gonna be funneled to the two streets that we live on over here. have they considered it all trying to tap into Oregon Street?
So remember, this is not about a development in particular. It's not about a particular development. It's just about an overlay zone
Okay,
of zoning. So if you want to come back up in the next hearing, we'd be happy to hear about that because it really doesn't have to do with where the
the overlay doesn't consider the traffic.
Well,
no overlays.
yeah, so this is amending the zoning map. It allows flexibility in the design. The subdivision and all that stuff, don't worry, we're gonna tackle that.
Yeah.
But that's the hearing after this one.
All right, so
Yeah.
we have input at that point.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and then
Sure.
traffic, all that stuff will be very germane at that point.
Back up.
I'll be back.
All right. Thank you.
Is that the March meeting that you?
No.
It's
Probably.
Directly after this hearing.
So just to reiterate, I'm only asking for testimony regarding the overlay of a plan unit development kind of coding on top of this manufactured home residential zoning. Just to allow more flexibility for somebody in the future, maybe soon, maybe later, to utilize that. All right, seeing no more testimony. And hearing no further questions from the commission and no further responses from staff, the public record is closed and this matter is returned to the table for deliberations on the decision.
And remember, this is a recommendation to council for this particular item.
Seems pretty simple.
I'm having trouble separating the two because it eliminates any of the lot sizes and the setbacks and things. All my tabs and questions about the subdivision
It's a struggle.
apply to that.
It's easier for us when we're always thinking about zoning, right? So we're in this weird world of thinking about zoning. And that's all this is a zoning tool.
Right. Everything's in the dirt, if they didn't want it.
Well, that's the question though, isn't it?
But we're eliminating
She
the fact
needs
that
the lines in the dirt if she's going to be able to.
That's the next one, but they
This
didn't
is
get
just
in the line.
It's applying more tools to use for whoever wants to build on this for whatever they want to do.
what I'm saying is if we approve this, it sounds like we can't question the 4-foot minimum side yard or any of those criteria.
Yeah, we can.
We can.
We're just drawing the outline of what they can use. Not the little spaces in between. We're not coloring within the lines right now.
I thought when we were approving the plant development, then that eliminated the minimum lot size. All we were concerned with was the lot coverage.
It enables someone to do that, and the table in this staff report is what the applicant is proposing, utilizing that overlay for the subdivision. So it's there as an example of the possibility.
We have a motion for discussion.
That we approve the overlay.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Ready, Jennifer, now
We
we.
recommend it to the city council. Is there anything more? Final decision, written decision of the planning commission and the appeal to the city council. That really apply. Notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who testify or submitted comments in the appeal deadline will make the learner. Decision, we need a recommendation.
Recommendation.
Yeah, so this overlay will go to the council on April 6th. The subdivision that we'll tackle in the next public hearing, that is within this group's authority to make the final decision. So I know it sounds wacky.
To make it clear, the things that these people have presented today are in our jurisdiction, or will they go to the city council?
The hearing that we just had for the overlay zone, that needs to be approved by the city council because you need an ordinance to amend the zoning map. And the city council approves ordinances, not the planning commission.
So if what we have done so far has disturbed somebody, they can come to the city council and express what they want.
Yes.
Thank you.
So that was,
Ready? You guys all charged up, ready for the next hearing?
So
that was quicker than we thought.
Oh, we have to wait, don't we?
we could finish the rest of
All
the,
right, let's do that.
yeah.
The hearing for the subdivision is scheduled at 8 p.m. and we don't want to start earlier just to be.
So,
So we're gonna take a little bit of business to buy time for 8 o'clock.
let's get to the planning director decisions first.
You don't do anything.
You want to talk to the planner about it?
I have one question. That's just gonna be I saw this line, it's not gonna be light up.
No. It actually might be internally illuminated, remember. But the electrical permits are dealt with through the county, so I didn't even address it.
Right.
Site design.
Oh, that's Margaret Kuhn. She is doing a tile ceramics manufacturing, small scale artisan workshop in the old Chronicle building. So Adam Fortier owned it for a little while and she purchased it. In a while. Yeah, so she's now gonna have a kiln, small scale kiln in there. And she's gonna improve the parking lot and I should see her.
On the state marine board.
Yeah,
So what's happening?
so that's a great question. We have a number of alternatives for how the in-water facility will be designed. And so there's gonna be a series of outreach meetings, including this body, to get feedback. And it involves the orientation of paddler and also the orientation of the fishing pier. We want to contact anglers to make sure that it's appropriate placement, and then people who are actually going to use the kayak, canoe ramp. Yeah. Yep, it'll be ADA accessible, yeah, in order to get funded by the.
A great one.
Yeah. Newport, example. Newport.
Okay.
We've been there. They just did a huge project with the Marine Board.
Any more parking for?
No, I mean, we're pretty limited on space. Our 10 spaces now will be ADA. So it's not nothing. It's better than.
Same options that you showed me the other day. Wow.
Yeah, so you'll get opportunity to provide feedback. I just put together the outreach plan and we're gonna have an internal stakeholder meeting first. I think it'll come to you guys. Yeah.
Way out there.
Next month.
It looks way out there in the plan, but when
Oh,
you
yeah.
look at the whole scheme of the marina, it's not that work. Let's get up to 20-foot people.
We're done with the activity report. I have an FYI item too.
So if we could just hold the conversation to a minimum or step outside so that our commissioners can still have, they're still doing part of the meeting.
It also picks up in
On the
the.
speakers, it picks up conversation, so.
Privacy.
Oh, damn.
Good. Jenny, you had something?
I just have a reminder about the joint planning commission city council meeting on the 16th at 5:30. If you come at 5, there will be food. And at that meeting, hopefully you can all make it, we're gonna talk about the street extension project of South First and Strand onto the waterfront property. It's at a 90% level, so we wanna bring that to city council and the commission to make sure there's no surprises when we go to construction. The whole street extension project, so
March
it's
16th.
a big deal, yeah. And it was city administrator's idea to rope you all in as part of that, just, it's not a requirement, it's just a hey, FYI. So. please come.
I think it was more than just FYI, but also to
I mean, there's no decision to be. made
decision,
yet,
but right,
yeah.
but I mean, to provide some comments and, feedback too. But yes, no decisions are being made, but still.
It's next Wednesday.
Yes. 5 o'clock. For a regular meeting. That's all I had.
We usually don't overshoot. It happens sometimes.
So there was another discussion item.
Do anything.
Ramp up your proactive planning commission discussion for a few minutes, or do you want to well,
It's done before 8.
can you break it, can you break it down into a little chunk?
Okay, 9 minutes.
You've got 9 minutes or
We can
that.
break it down into a little chunk.
10 minutes for a premise.
You will have only a little chunk.
There was at the beginning of the year, there were some discussions in the public forum about the planning commission becoming, in addition to the body that we're making, becoming more of a proactive body. And there was some feedback at the public hearings about different impediments to that, procedurally and have the resources for that. And then also privately, I've talked to people about their concerns about commitments and planning, individual planning commissioners. And we met with Russell and Jennifer and Councilor Berkeley to discuss, because there was kind of a straw vote. It was about 5-2 generally about a proactive planning commission, but it wasn't an official vote. The discussion was, how do we make a presentation to the planning commission of how we could be a proactive planning commission? There were concerns also raised during one of the public meetings about how would we take on projects and how would we meet, how do we get public input? We don't have answers for all of those things, but we talk about the first thing that we should do is to simply resolve that we would be a proactive body. That's basically, we're going to say we are going to be a proactive body, and we currently and into the future. And then we would meet in subcommittee and come back to the plan. That's how that would go, how decisions would be made. What kinds of, the planning commission itself would need to decide what issues, if any, would want to take on as a proactive body. We also discussed some additional resources that we would ask the city to bring to the table, to the planning department, not only to enable the planning commission to become a more proactive body, I'll say, but also to aid the planning department in carrying forward its important goals and complex goals, that you can see the type of work that needs to be done by the planning department, and to bring resources to the planning department, and also go to the council and ask for some finances to actually allow us to do some exploratory work that we would ask for, so that in the event the planning commission decided that there was a particular issue the planning commission wanted to explore, that we could conduct studies investigations or get public input, or the planning commission decided to proceed with its investigative efforts. And there would be a budget to allow us to do that in our discretion, of course, accounted for, without individually having to go to the city council to ask for money. And every time we wanted to maybe make a study on something we're interested in learning more about, it hasn't been done already, that we need to go to an outside resource, that we had some money to essentially hire somebody to do it so that we could get information, get public input, and then make decisions on recommendations to the city council. So that's about as far as we got. I think it's important, and one of the things that came out is we need to be mindful about the jobs that we're all already doing, and that we need to be fair to every planning commissioner and understand that taking on additional burdens individually, be careful about not overtaxing what is essentially a volunteer job. That's why we decided to go, we didn't decide, but we decided to propose baby steps. First step being simply, we're going to be a proactive planning commission. So we decided that's where you do how we're going to do it. It's something that the subcommittee would meet on and come back and discuss, and then we would discuss structures. We would look at how other planning commissions work and try to see how other planning commissions fulfill their roles with structures like the city of St. Helens. Come back and discuss it with the planning commission in full and see what the planning commission has to say about it, and see if we can get a resolution there. That's as far as we got. So I have several resolutions, but I think that that's kind of teeing up the discussion points for the planning commission and take these hearings and then talk about it and then decide how our fellow planning commissioners feel about it.
I have a question.
Yes.
The question is who or we?
Well, I met with Russ, and I met with Jennifer, and I met with Councilor Berkeley. We met together, and then also had individual discussions with other people about it. There was when I was interviewed for this position, there was a discussion in the interview about planning commission becoming a proactive body. I was in favor of that, and it was also brought up during planning. So this isn't something that, our fellow planning commissioners have stated that this is not something new. It's not something new that they really bringing up. The idea that they want to be, that individual commissioners want to be more involved in the direction of St. Helens, more in advance of decisions that are being made. And they want to implement structure. This isn't something coming from me. This is something that's coming from people that I know and respect, brought it forward. And so that's the answer. Thank you.
Russ was chair and felt that we were only reactive to applications and understanding what was going on. Proactive and reactive, and that's really stuck.
Save a little bit of time after the hearing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
after this hearing,
a little bit more.
I think we could all discuss it and talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
So, by 8 o'clock, everybody here that wanted to be here for this hearing? This subdivision? They went outside, go with them. Everybody here.
I think they're back in.
Wait till 8 o'clock.
7 seconds according to my watch.
I'm going with that clock.
Well.
She's on it.
10 seconds off.
10 seconds off, yeah. Time is.
Clock went.
Computer says 8.
Public hearing is now open. The quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is request for a subdivision, preliminary plat, subdivision variance, sensitive lands permits. The subject property is identified in the county assessor's map as lot 700, 1900, 1901, on map 5N1W33 and 5N1W. The applicant is North 8th Street LLC. The owner is Sean Clark, Deanna Womack, and Elks Lodge Homeowners Association in St. Helens Lodge, number 1999 BPOE. Because quasi judicial proceedings require the observance of certain procedural formalities, we'll take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. For this, wish to declare ex parte contact, conflict of interest, or bias in this matter.
I declare that I've applied to be a member of the Elks Lodge. I didn't know anything about this application at the time I applied, and I had not had any ex parte communications with anybody about it, and I don't think it's going to affect me.
I said in the previous hearing, if I say it again, I work for the Oregon Department of State Lands. I'm aquatic resource coordinator, which means I'm the permitting guy for this county. And I was heavily involved with the permitting for this development as is proposed today. I will try to keep my comments strictly to the proposed development, and if the applicant has any issue with me being up here in the commission, please state so.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Does any member is anyone else from the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? By the way, I can't vote, I'm the chairman, so but I'm trying not to make undue pressure on anyone. Acknowledge I happen to know. Break it down. All right, generally the order of proceedings will be as follows: required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony of those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and decision. Following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to the city code and ORS 197.763. The following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. Subdivision preliminary plat, St. Helens Municipal Code 17.136.120. The sensitive lands permit related to significant wetlands, chapters 17.40 and 17.132 St. Helens Municipal Code. St. Helens sensitive lands permit related to steep slopes, St. Helens Municipal Code 17.44.0401. Sensitive lands related to drainage ways, St. Helens Municipal Code 17.44.0402. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria as described. Further criteria in the plan, such as the comprehensive plan or land use regulation, such as that found in the development code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other decisions relating to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Staff, do you have a report for us?
I do in this case for sure. And this is the moment you've all been waiting for. We thank you for your patience as the city's magic occurs. So this is a public hearing for this subdivision and several other related applications, because there's a lot going on in this site. This is a 66 lot planned development subdivision. Planned development, given the overlay zone that was approved, and that's assuming that that approval is sustained through the council process. Now, something to point out, we have a cadre of permits here. And we're not just dealing with one property, we're dealing with 3 properties. The main subject property is the one to be divided with the 66 lots. But we do have a couple lots off of Madrona Court. And if we can see the top right-hand corner of the property, those properties are involved for the purposes of an extension of a sanitary sewer line that's connecting to a pump station on the east side of Madrona Court, and a pedestrian path over the same area as that sewer line is also proposed. And so it's a little weird in that some of the sensitive land stuff applies to those Elks properties, but the planned development, the subdivision doesn't, just to add to the complexity of this particular case. 24 acres in size, almost. And there are a couple wetlands which are significant to the city. And when we talk about wetlands, there's waters of the state cares, there's waters of the nation, the federal government cares. And then there's locally significant wetlands, in which case the city cares. And the city cares so much that we have protection zones that are treated similar to if they're a wetland themselves. And in this case, the wetlands which are significant to the city have those protection zones, 75-foot protection zones. The complex there on the lower right-hand side, it's actually a pretty cool pond feature and will be a nice backyard for children and adults alike if the subdivision occurs. And then also there's a wetland there in the upper right-hand corner, which is also significant to the city. All of the other ones fall into waters of the state or nation, but are not significant to the city. So this is contingent upon the adoption of a plan development overlay. Without that overlay, this would not be possible. In the last hearing, we talked about some of the provisions that can be manipulated, like lot size, lot dimension. And there is a table attached to this report that spells out those specific standards. And we can get into those later on if you'd like, but just know that there are some standards that the applicant proposes, and of course there are lots to comply with them because they're the ones that they proposed. So whenever we have a subdivision, we want to make sure that the wetlands are delineated, and our code calls that an environmental assessment. That was done. We have a wetland delineation approved by the Division of State Lands in 2019 that identifies the wetlands and also identified some drainages, which also matter in our code, which we'll talk about in a bit. And there are the impacts proposed to the wetland protection zones. Some of them relate to some logging activity that occurred in 2019. And when we first went out there after it was done, I thought it was a lot worse in relation to city rules than it was. So I mentioned how the wetland on the lower right-hand corner was significant. And I remember walking the site right after it was logged and looking at the wetland just to the upper left of those two. And I wasn't aware of the wetland complex on the site, and I thought that wetland was related to the city one. And that there was a whole lot of stuff done that shouldn't have been. I think that was the case with the agencies, but they got it resolved. But in 2019, we did, because it's like, okay, some things happened that shouldn't, let's figure out what they were. And the idea was to figure that out, so when we had this application, we could just fold it into that and be efficient about it. And so if you dug into your application materials, you'll see some memoranda from the wetland consultant from 2019 or so to me explaining some of the trees that were removed from those protection zones. And so that's one thing that we'll mitigate for as part of this. Another is the extension of the sewer line itself in the upper right-hand corner. That is going to see, it's pretty close to the north part of that wetland, so that is going to be within a protection zone. And that's something we'll need to deal with our sensitive land permitting, which we'll talk about pretty soon. As I mentioned in the last hearing, we talked about the density. 66 lots are proposed, and that's well within the maximum allowed, so no issue there. We will need a tree plan, and what the tree plan does, so obviously it was logged more than a year ago, so those trees are long gone. But you still have several, especially in that upper right-hand corner and on the Elks property. And that both shows how the ones to be preserved will be protected during construction, and then how to mitigate the ones being removed. So that'll be something we'll require. One of the issues that we kind of talked about with the applicant was the angle of 9th and 8th streets. So you can see how it's not quite at a right angle there. And there was some discussion between our engineering department and the consultant and us, and ultimately it looks like it's something that can be easily resolved just with some physical improvements. If you looked at the memo, which is Exhibit B in the staff report, which came from our city engineering department, a little bulb out on the south side of that should be able to remedy the intersection angle. So that's one of the conditions, one of the many conditions you'll see in the conditions, and something we hadn't quite worked out with the applicant, so I wanted to make sure that was discussed. Another thing to discuss, and I'll talk about this in greater detail at the end of my presentation of the staff report, are blocks. So we have these standards for the maximum perimeter of a block, which is around 1,800 feet. And the block that they're creating, you have to use your imagination so we don't have to flip through a bunch of slides. But most of you probably know, especially those who live on these streets, that the 8th and 9th Street legs here terminate, and they're basically a segment of those streets between Deer Island Road and the subject property. And that creates, yeah, we can go to this slide just to show this. So you have a partial block there, and they are completing that block, and it's gonna have a perimeter a little above 200 square feet. That's fine. The code says when things are funky, you know, we can give some of those allowances. So no issue there. It's great that they're completing the block. We do need to talk about the block bounded by 10th and 9th Street. But I think that's going to be, when we talk about 10th Street, it's going to be easier to just compartmentalize that into discussion at the end. So we'll get into that later. Utilities, let's talk about utilities really quick. Water is easy, it's available from 9th and 8th streets, water is pressurized. If the others were only that easy. Sanitary sewer is not so easy. I think the applicant would love to be able to extend the sewers that are right there in 8th and 9th Street. The problem is they're just too darn shallow. As you know, that old saying, bleed runs downhill, and that's how it works in our system. And so when it's shallow and you have all these homes, you don't really have any downgrade to go with. So the applicant, they had a couple choices. The option that they're pursuing, connecting to the pump station or near the pump station in Madrona Court. The other one that they talked about was, let's go down a little bit. So at the end, the southern end of Madrona Court, you see a couple parallel lines there. That's an easement that was reserved some time ago. And we kind of talked about extending a sewer line from there. But when we look at the sensitive lands permit, you know, one of the things we have to consider is the impact, the minimum possible. And extending it from that side, one, you would be going through city significant wetlands, you'd be going through probably wetlands themselves, not just protection zones. And so that would be more difficult to permit in the light of wetlands. So because of all that stuff, that's why the sewer is coming from the north, not from 8th and 9th Street. And then stormwater infrastructure. So storm is commonly a concern of neighbors in subdivisions. And in this case, you're not only dealing with the storm, you're dealing with the health of the wetlands. So you're gonna have your typical piped infrastructure for conveyance purposes in the street, and then a variety of vegetative bioswales, 4 in total, which are identified on there. 3 of them are on the east side, and then there's 1 on the west side. And if you read the report in detail, you'll see that the city does not want ownership of those, but we'll take ownership of anything in the street, which is typical. So that's how stormwater is being handled. We do have a preliminary stormwater report, but we will need a final report, which is typical of subdivisions following some preliminary plat approval. So that's a brief on utilities. There are a couple different methods to complete the subdivision and be able to get building permits. For a long time with the city, it was complete everything, and then we can get your final plat recorded. Now you have a bunch of lots. And that changed in 2020 when Oregon House Bill 2306 was passed. And that just means that we have to allow an option for certain things to not be done to allow that final plat, and it just involves more financial guarantees. In the city, we still haven't had someone that pursues that option, but it's written in the decision. So if you were reading a bunch of stuff that looked kind of weird and it referenced that House bill, that's what I'm talking about. Traffic, let's talk about traffic. So this is a larger subdivision. It's large enough that it met the thresholds for a traffic impact analysis. And so we worked with their traffic consultant to determine the scope. And it didn't result in any functional issues pertaining to vehicle use. And what the traffic analysis usually does is it looks at intersections and it asks, okay, are these intersections gonna blow up? And what I mean by blow up is function like Gable Road. Things are backed up, not working well, people are waiting too long and are mad. The traffic consultant did not identify any blowing up. But it does still give us some data of interest. Traffic analysis itself does not necessarily evaluate non-motor vehicle travel or pedestrians. And especially because of 9th being extended like it is, if we look at some of the anticipated changes, just to give you an idea, so if we're standing at Deer Island and 9th Street today during what we call the PM peak hour. Now, what the PM peak is in traffic engineering world, that's just the busiest hour in the day for traffic. And it's in the afternoon, which is typical. I think it's sometime between 5 and 6, but it's been a while since I've read that definition. But just in the afternoon when it's the busiest. So right now, if we're standing on 9th and Deer Island today, we would have about 20 trips, and a trip is a car coming or going. So you're standing there, you have a little clicker, you'll count 20 cars. Post-development, that is going to increase to 75 peak trips, an increase of 250%. And that basically means at that intersection, you're looking at more than 1 vehicle per minute during that PM peak hour. 8th Street doesn't feel the impact as bad, which, you know, when you look at the layout, that makes sense. That's changing from 32, so it's more now than 9th Street, and it'll be increasing to 42 PM peak hour trips, an increase of 31%. And that's going to be important when we consider, you know, what do we do with 10th Street? Do we do anything with 9th and 8th Street, the existing legs? And I'll save that to the end.
Jacob, does that traffic study take into account the draft bill that basically gets rid of single family housing? Take that into account when they draft study?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just so everybody has the context of that question. So recently, last year, maybe the year before, can't remember now, we met our deadlines. That was the important thing. So the state said that St. Helens, being a city more than 10,000 population, we have to treat duplexes the same as single family dwellings from a regulatory standpoint. So we cannot bias duplexes. So we can't have standards that apply to duplexes that don't apply to single family dwellings. And in the context of a traffic impact analysis, the analysis, you know, just assumes detached single family dwellings. And, you know, you could argue, well, they could do all duplexes and it's the same. But then are you biasing the duplex by treating it differently in the analysis? So it gets really kind of finicky, but their analysis did focus on single family dwellings. Yeah.
The lot sizes that are being proposed, though, in at least this map, they would not allow duplexes on with the lot sizes that are being proposed.
Well, and that, so before, and we're kind of getting into deliberations, but I'll answer this. Before, we had a separate minimum lot size for a duplex versus a single family dwelling. And that was one of the things that we had to change with that state law, because having a higher standard, a higher minimum lot size for the duplex in itself was prejudiced to the duplex use. And that's what we had to get away with. So in this case, even if their lot size was 100 square feet, which none of them are that small, we couldn't say whether or not it could be a duplex versus a single family dwelling. We would have to allow either.
Duplex dog out.
And just out of curiosity, since just to follow this line. We already have somebody here concerned about the.
There's not deliberations yet.
Yeah.
No questions yet. I was just gonna.
Unless you have a.
Well, I'm just gonna ask them a question of whether because of the traffic impact, potentially, we make a recommendation that plexus not be allowed. It'd be something to be contrary to the code. Okay.
We get slapped.
Let's see, so another thing that this talks about is not precluding manufactured homes. We talked about in the last one. So the rest of the subdivision stuff I'll talk about at the end. Let's talk about the subdivision variance really quick. So, Jenny, if you could go to the normal plan. Let's scroll out just a little bit so we can see the whole thing. Okay, so the subdivision variance is for the cul-de-sac. So our normal standards for a cul-de-sac calls for it to be no longer than 400 feet and providing access to no more than 20 dwelling units. In this case, the cul-de-sac exceeds 1,000 linear feet and provides access to 44 lots. And so it's a much larger cul-de-sac than our standards, and that's why we needed the subdivision variance. Because of the constraints for the wetlands, the justification for the variance, at least as far as staff sees, is there. You know, they really got hammered on trying to get something to work, and it just so happened that everything was forced to the west side and resulting in this layout that you see here. So, you know, as staff, we're not frowning on the variance. There's one thing of note and one thing of consideration in regards to that. One of the things is good old Oregon Fire Code raising its ugly head, and section D107, which is described in the report. And there is, once you have a certain amount of lots, I think it was more than 20. It's in there. This is more, I know that for sure. With only one access, then they are required to have a sprinkler system. In this case, because of the particularly long cul-de-sac, it kind of creates that situation. So if there was a secondary fire access from somewhere, that could remedy that. But a fire access, you know, all weather surface, 20 feet in width, that's a lot more than a sewer line and a trail. So so the sprinkler issue is something that just kind of presents itself in this design. The other thing to think about with that variance is when we talk about traffic impacts and that kind of stuff, which, like I said, I'm going to save to the end. This does focus traffic on 9th over other streets, and that's why, you know, it has such a higher predicted traffic increase. And do you think any mitigation is warranted based on that? So that's the variance. Now, the sensitive lands, luckily the sensitive lands are pretty clear and straightforward. We talked about the impacts to the protection zones. Because of all the options for sewer, we do think that is the most minimal approach. We don't have any issue there. It's just a matter of dealing with all the wetland stuff. And what's going to make that a little bit more complicated is the fact that we have, you know, some lots owned by the Elks and by the applicant, and how the documentation is going to work given those different owners. We'll have to work that out. Steep slopes. So there are a variety of steep slopes on this property. And really, when we talk about all of the sensitive lands permits related to the slopes, the drainage ways, I guess those two, the limited site disturbance, which is a result of just trying to avoid the wetland impacts, it's an important thing to highlight. there's a lot of steep slopes in the property, including the areas that they're gonna fill, but they are minimizing the amount of steep slopes they're impacting. And then they have all their erosion control stuff. So we don't see an issue there. Now drainage ways, drainage way means a linear water feature that is pushing a certain volume of water. There are a couple of those on here. And again, DSL and the feds were mean, and so the drainage ways are avoided, which makes it easy for us. So as far as the sense of land permitting, we don't see any issue there. So let's talk about 10th, 9th. What are we gonna do there? So this map is very generalization of the property there highlighted. We know we have the wetland complex to the east. We have the trail coming from the northeast. We know we have a street extension proposed for 8th and 9th, but we have 10th there. And when we have a subdivision, you know, we can't ignore that. We have to at least kind of talk about it. And this subdivision was really complex. And you know, in some of our preliminary meetings, there's a comment here and there about, well, we have to think about 10th, but we really never hammered that out. We did a lot of the other stuff. And what we do with 10th can relate to how we look at 8th and 9th Street and all of these new impacts on those roads. So in this exhibit, I'm gonna talk about 4 potential options for the Planning Commission to consider. And this is not, it's talked about in general in the staff report, but it's not organized how I'm organizing it for this presentation here. So the one thing that's automatic is to dedicate the right of way, and that's why I have this highlighted in yellow, to dedicate this just to advance the northerly extension of 10th Street. So that's easy. I think that's on the table regardless. And just so you know, there's about 47 feet of the 10th Street right of way that abuts this area. So that's at least what I see as kind of a default condition. So then what do we do, if anything, beyond that? So the second option is that dedication plus a pedestrian path. Now, an example of a pedestrian path would be the Emerald Meadows subdivision, where we had a 10-foot easement with a 5-foot walkway within. And so the next level is having a walkway that connects 9th to 10th. And that is a path of least resistance as far as getting some type of connection to 10th. And you could potentially put it within an easement. You see that there's a proposed easement there. It could potentially be a path within there. It doesn't encumber this plan substantially in that way. And then, you know, they'll have to kind of design it around that storm facility. And that's a potential way of being okay with the lack of pedestrian accommodation on 8th and 9th Street, which we'll talk about after I cover these options for 10th. So the next option is continuing that right-of-way dedication like we talked about, but then having a 20-foot alley connecting 10th and 9th Street. So now the bar is a little bit higher, a little bit more improvement. A 20-foot alley would be within a 20-foot right of way. And so something like that probably would require a little bit of a shift in those property lines. Now, that can help resolve some issues on 10th Street. 10th Street is a street longer than 150 feet. And nowadays, when we have streets of that length, we want a turnaround, fire-approved turnaround. And if you had an alley connecting 10th and 9th, that would do it. That would also accommodate other larger vehicles like garbage trucks, delivery vans, and things like that. And as an alley could also be used for pedestrians, so you still get that connection. An alley may help deter shortcut users. There's always that concern, or people gonna want to try to take advantage of that as a quote unquote shortcut to the highway. So that's always something to think about. And the next level of improvement would be, again, continuing that north-south dedication and then a full street. That would be the most burdensome to the applicant because you're taking up 40 or 50 foot of area for right-of-way. But it does provide the optimum shared space for vehicles and pedestrians with the sidewalk. And that would open 10th Street up to more traffic, which, may be good, may be bad, just it depends on how you look at it from a distribution standpoint or not. So if we go to the next slide, there's two things to talk about here. And this issue that we're transitioning to is, well, let's look at 8th and 9th Street now and try to think about, well, what's this gonna result in? So to do that, we have to look at our local street standard, which is illustrated here. A roadway width of 34 feet, and that's for a 20-foot roadway with parking on either side, and then a standard 5-foot sidewalk. So that's our kind of the base that we're comparing existing conditions to. And here is the map we prepared just to help illustrate some of those existing conditions. And now with the what was called Eagle Lakes Bluff, some of you may remember that one from 2008 and 9. Over there, we do have sidewalks there, but if you can zoom out, you want to see everything between Federal property and Tia Island Road. So in all cases, we have areas that are as narrow as 23 feet wide, maybe with gravel shoulders. But basically, the pedestrian accommodation is lacking. And so the question here with the new anticipated traffic, should that be considered? And one of the things to think about is the level of stress for a pedestrian. So let's say you have a 23-foot wide area, and it's not 23 foot wide in all places, and that's more pertaining to 8th and 9th Street. But let's say you had a lot more traffic and you have a 23-foot wide paved area, and you have a couple cars coming by, that leaves 3 feet of area for the pedestrian and on the same grade as the vehicles. Higher level of stress. And it probably works now because it's a dead end, not a lot of traffic. We're going to have a lot of new traffic. Full street with a curb and sidewalk is ideal. But we have to be careful about requiring off-site improvements. There's a certain point where the applicant's gonna be like, dude, that's overkill. You're overstepping your bounds. So we have that balance. Now, 10th Street is really wide on the north side as far as its overall pavement. And then where it narrows, the pavement width is wider than the other streets, and there's limited driveways. So just looking at the existing conditions, 10th is a really good place to walk, comparing all three of them. Another important thing about 10th Street is it's the closest to the highway. And chances are you're gonna have people wanting to walk that way for a variety of reasons. Could be going to the transit center. And I know when I walk in a city, and a lot of people, they look for the short route. And 10th Street is definitely the short route. And that's why I think at the bare minimum, we should try to get a pedestrian connection in there. So you could argue, because 10th Street is, you know, not so bad, if you have a pedestrian connection to 10th that people could use, then we don't necessarily need to worry about 8th and or 9th as much. However, we do have public testimony. These are just my thoughts and thinking about this application and helping you think about it as well. And a whole bunch of conditions. We can talk about those if you want. But I'll shut up for now. Unless you have any questions.
Lots of questions, but
Yeah,
swirling around.
you know where to start.
Totally.
Yeah, this one, you know, I knew this one would be a doozy. And it was definitely took more time than your average subdivision. A lot of details.
Talk about an easement. Halfway from this street over toward Bluff Street. 2 blocks.
And it wouldn't have to be there. It could be at the southern end of lot 16.
From that. And you're going. So how are you gonna close that?
There are wetlands. That wetland is not the existing one. That is proposed manipulation of what is there now. So if you compare that to the existing conditions page, so this is a good question. I'm glad you brought this up. So if you go to the normal staff report.
Bear with me, it'll take a second to get there.
C1.
It's gonna be, there's an existing condition sheet in there.
C1.
Way up towards the top.
Oh, I gotta go 20 pages. Second.
Here.
There we go. Almost.
They've all been impacted.
I take it out.
So that's what's existing. So you can see that the proposal is to manipulate what is there. And this is a proposal. This is preliminary. So it is subject to change based on the requirements of the code as you set forth. So there's an opportunity to manipulate. At least as far as I know, there's an opportunity to manipulate. We'll see how the applicant responds to that.
We can ask more questions later.
My question was, why don't we ask specific questions, so that we're about the application.
We can ask specific questions of down later. Let's have the applicant's presentation. And some testimony from the audience, people have been waiting patiently.
Just let me know which one you'd like me to go to, if any.
Probably back down to where you were at there, Jenny, on that landscape plan. Was
Okay. Give me a second, if you want to.
Well, again, and I'll say Jacob, excellent job on a very complicated staff report. As you guys mentioned, this is a project that's been contemplated by our client for years, and we are somewhat of a recent addition to the team, but I'll just say again that prior to our involvement, there was a much more aggressive proposal that was in consideration with some of the state and federal agencies with regard to impact to the wetlands. And this is a much less aggressive approach. And we're probably walking that fine line here between something that's feasible economically, just because, you know, the densities are pulled back quite a bit from, you know, what you would typically be going after in designing improvements to a piece of property like this. And of course, a lot of costs associated with working around these wetlands, working with the bedrock that is inevitably going to be dealt with on site. And so we're walking that fine line between a project that is or is not economically feasible. So of course, we're trying to minimize the amount of intangible expenses in the design process. Is with regard to what could be proposed, like I mentioned, much less dense, so those traffic impacts will be less than they could otherwise be. With regard to that connection at 10th Street there, for what it's worth, we've talked about those options with our client, and the dedication that 47 feet of property that's shared with the existing 10th Street right of way. That dedication is, I think, very feasible and logical, wouldn't really have any negative impacts on the development. And even a connecting pathway would be, I believe, pretty easy to pull off. As you mentioned, Jacob, we currently already have an easement there in between lots 18 and 19 for that storm line to come through. It'd be pretty easy to make that a pedestrian trail. You know, we'd have to probably do a little bit of redesign on that stormwater facility, but there's room to manipulate that. I will point out that I believe we've gone above and beyond with regard to that pathway that winds through the development. We thought it'd be a nice feature to connect that to Mid-Road Court. I don't believe that connection was a requirement, but we thought it would add value to the overall connectivity within the neighborhoods there. And especially with the Elks Lodge down in that proximity, seemed like a nice connecting pathway. So, you know, those pathways do all add expenses though. So it's trying to, like I mentioned, I think this, in my opinion, is going to be a really nice opportunity to clean up a lot that's got a lot of challenges. I think a lot of people that took a close look at it probably would consider it somewhat of an eyesore currently. In my opinion, this is going to be an overall net improvement to the area. We've put a lot of work into designing the storm drainage system to ensure that it maintains the hydrology to those wetlands, to make sure the wetlands that are going to be created and remain are going to be healthy. And you know, we went through a pretty lengthy process with the state and federal agencies to gain their approval on our approach for the impacts to those wetlands, and as I mentioned, are much less aggressive approach than the original design. So anyway, that's a quick summary from our perspective, and I'd like to know if you have any questions.
The street, the Engle Street issue, had doable solutions.
Yeah, we did take a look at that. What Dan is talking about, and Jacob touched on it, is this angle right here where this connecting street comes in tonight. Ideally, this would be a perpendicular interface between these two streets. And what the city code says is that ideally it would be 90 degrees, but not less than 60. And we are walking that line there. It's, well, I don't think quite 60 with where it's at now, but we did take a close look at that. And with some minor modifications, that requirement can be met. So that's something that on the final construction plans, final design.
I think you were hinting at the density lots, basically, so having an alley with full road property. That.
Yeah, I think, not fully assessing it, probably the bigger factor, aside from the lost lot there, is just the expense of it. This isn't topographically too challenging right here, but to cut a street longitudinally there, east and west, it'd be a pretty expensive street to build. And there's another big challenge there. There's quite a bit of offsite water that we're dealing with that comes onto the property in this area. And that's one of the reasons we've got this storm facility designed for that area. So to put an actual street through there would present some real design complexities.
Questions of the applicant?
I just have a couple. As far as the routing of the sewer line, is there any other way it could go? I know there was a thought on there, the drone, but is there a way to access? I think it's on Oregon Street. Is that possible? I don't know what's to the west of it.
Yeah, we did take, as Jacob mentioned, a really close look. Really the only two feasible options that were on the table were the connection that we're proposing up here at the very northeast for the property, and then kind of looping our way around this significant wetland to hit this easement. This being a significant wetland, though, there are some real challenges and it's a little less efficient route. One of the things that we've really had to take a close look at on this site, as we do on a lot of properties in St. Helens, is where the basalt bedrock's at. And so that, aside from the actual length of that sewer line, was a really strong consideration with each of the options. And it just, we had, of course, a lot of test pits done on site to look at where that basalt bedrock was, the depths of it. And that was one of the major deterrents to this route. There's some other complexities. This is actually a pump line, I believe, within Madrona Court. So it would have basically involved a pretty significant existing system within Madrona. And also, we just thought that this seemed like a logical path. It's felt a good location for a trail as well, and so putting in the sewer line through that area then kind of paves the way for a connection trail.
He was asking, was there any way to the west, or switch to the west in Oregon Street?
So to go anywhere but these two options would require an additional pump station of some type, and we did assess that, both the options of a private and a public pump station. We're going to try to avoid those when we can. Of course, they're expensive, and then you've got the long-term maintenance considerations, whether it's private or public, and then you still have the downstream considerations for wherever you would decide to tie in that pump line. But in either case, go anywhere but here, it would have involved another pump station.
I know the middle route has a lot of topography issues also besides the rock, deep gullies.
One just kind of real loose consideration we made was actually, connecting a street through. This is a vacant lot currently here, but with the wetland and the associated restrictions around that, it's just
Any questions about?
I have another question about the discussion about the sidewalks on Ninth, which is the additional traffic, and I understand that because of the topography and all the wetlands, that this design, which is laid out logically to try to accommodate the wetlands, but it is going to put some traffic on at night. I'm just throwing this out here. I don't know the developers thought about this, but the feasibility of some kind of fee on the buyers of the properties to try to fund the sidewalk project or something like that. So that residents of Ninth Street have some sidewalk, stand on, walk on, potential extra traffic. I'm just throwing that out there as a question.
So all I'd say to that is that, with a project like this, I mean, the developer's already building a significant amount of public infrastructure, sidewalks, utility improvements for the benefit of the public. And I believe I think that would be a hard sell to any developer. I've never been a developer that's excited about offsite.
The idea wasn't the developer would take on just a fee for when the lots are sold. I don't even know.
We can take a look at that.
Andrew, has the city ever partnered with a developer to help them? It's quite a long street, both of those that would need sidewalks and everything. Any projects you could think of that have partnered with you to?
Not that I can think of.
Developer.
Yeah, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting put it on the buyers. That's.
I don't know for sure how the city's fee in lieu of system is structured. I know we're the city engineer for the city of Vernonia, and we're in the middle of setting up a fee in lieu of system that that's what that money would be pooled for, would be to pick an area that was a logical selection for sidewalks. I don't know how the city's systems.
It wouldn't apply in this case because they're gonna have sidewalks.
Yeah.
But we could use that money in that pool to build sidewalks on Ninth potentially.
When those omissions were made for in the future, when the houses on 8th and 9th and 10th, they were in the 2000s, right? The year 2000s when those were made. They're not old houses.
Yeah, some of them are newer. I mean, it shows you what may be an older philosophy to development. And when you look at them, it's like, well, these will never go through that. When you see how they were developed, it looks like that was the mentality. And that's what we get. That's what we're dealing with.
Street has sidewalks.
Not all the way.
Yeah, that was the Eagle Lakes Bluff. That was one that it was actually going to be attached housing, way more dense than it shows there, and that died in the Great Recession. And then someone took it over and replatted it.
Any other questions for the applicant? Fine. Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Now, do you have any testimony in support of the application? Support. Do you have any neutral testimony, not favored nor against the proposal? Just want to talk about it.
You speak up just a little.
I was asking for neutral testimony, those not in favor or against the proposal. Seeing none? What? Oh, no.
He wants to.
You want to talk about what you talked about earlier?
Yes.
I think that would fit better into the opposition, maybe, or do you think it's neutral?
I'm not against.
Okay, well, come on up. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm sure you're in the right category. Whatever you need to say.
Okay, I guess I live on the end of 8th Street, so I got a great view of the area. My major concern is because of the hills and all that, there's gonna be a lot of fill.
Sir, just so we know, can you state your name just so it's further?
Fred Adams.
Thank you.
So I talked to my neighbors, and we are concerned about the amount of truck traffic that's gonna be coming down our streets. 8th Street would be the worst place to run dump trucks. We got a dog living on that street, a lot of kids on that street. I guess that means that what, force the trucks to go to 9th Street? Now, has anybody considered the amount of fill that's gonna be required? How many trucks a day are gonna be going up and down our street? Have they made some kind of accommodation for that?
We can ask the applicant to talk about that later. But,
All right.
I'll bring it up.
I still wish they would look at, the county has a road on their property, right down to the edge of the development they're gonna do. I mean, they can make an accommodation with the county and use that at least for the development. Take some of the heat off us when they're doing the building. So I'm just throwing that out there.
An idea.
So it's
Seen the road
interesting.
there, yeah.
Yeah, if you look over there, they got the road right down to that. That would be a great way to take the heat from the road on the neighborhood development process. So perhaps I covered what I wanted.
That's why we have public testimony. Thank you.
Okay.
I have someone on Zoom who wants to speak as neutral.
Yeah, neutral? Okay.
Okay, we should be able to hear you.
Let him talk.
My question is regarding, as I stated before, the infrastructure for the septic. Andrew Bremner. And I'm at 260 Madrona Court.
Go ahead.
So the question is regarding the infrastructure for the septic system and the connectivity to it. So is that system designed to handle this number of homes in addition to it? Furthermore, is that system, if in fact it is, then what are the contingencies for additional septic and a holding tank or a potential holding tank, so it doesn't affect those wetlands further downstream should there be an overflow?
Well, it's not a septic system, it's a public sanitary sewer system. So there shouldn't be holding tanks, it should just be the pipe infrastructure. And I can say that fortunately, very recently, the city adopted a sanitary sewer master plan. And because we had been talking about this development for several years, we knew it was on the horizon. And so when we were talking to our consultants about potential future impacts, we were able to call out this development. And so it was contemplated in that master plan. And so it is near capacity. We're talking with our engineering department, that near capacity does include this development. And in that plan, it's shown, the pump station is shown as needing to be replaced, but it's not on the needs to be replaced now. I think it's a 5-year period. Don't take my word for that. But when I spoke to our engineering staff about it, there wasn't an immediate urgency.
So what is the volume of the existing pump system, and what would the volume be with the addition?
That is data that I do not have. It's possible the applicant can answer that on rebuttal.
That's the concern.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other neutral testimony?
Questions?
Please come up. Your name.
I'm Bernadette Crepeau Haskett. And I came before you. And congratulations on this plan, a heck of a lot better than what we did before. And there was an impact already on the wetlands, and I'd like to know who's monitoring them. Is someone going to be monitoring the wetlands during the development of all these houses? I noticed the name down here, the ecologist. Is that who, if we have a concern, is that who we contact?
Well, depends on which wetland it is. A couple of the wetlands are city.
It's right off of Eagle Lake Bluff. It's that section right there.
Oh, the pond.
Yeah.
Those are cities wetlands. And so you could talk to us, but they're also wetlands of the state.
I heard that ODOT was the one that had something to do with that. That's one of the answers I got when I was trying to figure out who.
Well, I think I can answer that. Some of the wetlands on the site are proposed to be impacted with the development. Some were inadvertently impacted prior, and they've been resolved. That any future filling, if it doesn't fit the plan, their permit with the state, someone would probably like to hear about it right in this area.
Want his home address.
Yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, because that was our major concern. I agree with our neighbor that, you know, if we could do something with the county property on 10th, because we have a lot of children in the neighborhood, and we're on that section of street that's like 20. Well, actually, it's when you get 2 cars parked on either side of our street, we probably have a 14-foot drive, you know, so with big trucks coming down, it'd be dangerous. Thank you so much.
They're neutral testimony. I thought I saw it.
Matt Duffy, and I live at 245 Madrona Court, which is lot 8. Can you scroll up some, please?
Let's see, I
Keep going. Let's see it. Okay, so basically, right here. Yeah, right there. So really, I just have a couple concerns. So we have a lot of, when it rains, we have a lot of water that literally comes up to our property. And where it actually goes under the road, it goes over the road. So I'm sure there's gonna be a bigger pipe put in to allow the extra water to go through, but I kind of just want it out there that we already do have water that comes up to the house. Well, 25, 30 feet away from the house when it's really there. So that's a concern. However, the wetlands are affected by, you know, the digging for the sewer line and adding that in. And then I guess the trail, is it the city that has something to do with the walking path that's going in? Do we know?
Well, it's proposed by the applicant, and it's proposed to be a public easement, thus a public trail.
Okay. So where that goes through, and I'm making an assumption, but so we have kind of a wall of rock on our property that I think if you guys do the path, or if it's proposed to go through that area, so that kind of blocks, that gives us our privacy to our side yard, our backyard. So how, I guess I want it to be taken into consideration that we lose that if you guys have to go through that, and then how you're going to keep, I'm gonna say, people from just wandering right onto the property if there's a path that lines our property.
If you could go to C1 again, that top plan.
No.
Sorry. 20 up.
Yeah, okay.
Let's have topography on it.
Right.
Looks like you could see that rock pile. Right house.
it's this one.
You can't see where the sewer line is gonna be placed, but it'd be right against the property line. So,
I believe that sewer line goes, through our property anyway, which isn't really my concern.
go through the property because it's gonna be the Elks property. But see, next to the road, see those topography lines? That looks to me like a berm of rock.
It is. It's a high mound.
Yeah.
It's rock and dirt. But mostly rock.
So that wouldn't actually be affected at all.
It's not on the Elks property. Where the cursor is where the sewer line was built. Yeah. That mound would still remain.
Okay, so it sounds like you guys are coming to the south of the basically the drain on the road, which is a little bit almost directly across from the pump station. Correct?
Yeah, you can see the pump station where
Pump station's right here.
we are coming in south of that, and then there basically the new sewer line would come into Madrona Court, I believe a new manhole there. Yeah. And then it would jog northeast to the existing pump station.
So an important thing to recognize is what we have is a preliminary plan. We don't have construction plans yet.
Right.
And so exactly how it's gonna be installed, that's.
It's unknown.
Determined.
Got it. So if you guys take that into consideration, if there is a path, it would almost be kind of nice to have it on the opposite side of that rock berm and not through that rock berm, because if you guys go through that, basically that whole wall is going to come down, from my opinion. So then it does affect our property and it does affect our privacy. That's really the only concerns I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other neutral testimonies before we have opposition testimony?
I'm Joanne Rockwell. I live on 8th Street. I have a concern. When they first started clearing the said property 2 summers ago, and 8th Street was what was being used for the going in and coming out of the dump trucks and all of the excavation and so on, the wood chippers, everything else that was coming in. When you come into the cul-de-sac on 8th Street, when you first enter the cul-de-sac, the road narrows and there's a crook in the road, almost what you consider a bottleneck. And we have houses on both sides of that bottleneck. And we have people that not only use their driveway, but also park on the street itself. There was one dump truck coming, that's all that could come in or out. You've got them lined up in back of you. You've got people, the residents that are trying to come in and out of the road. And it's a complete standstill because you've got dump trucks lined up where that bottleneck is, where only one vehicle, whether it be a dump truck, a regular car, or what have you, can get through there. So it's going to be a complete jam up. We saw it 2 years ago, and we're just getting started on this whole project here. So it is a great concern. We also, like the little lady mentioned, we have a lot of children in that cul-de-sac. And, I have more concerns going forward. But for right now, that's my main concern in that, is there a possibility? I don't see a possibility for it being diverted, but is there a way that, where we wouldn't have this position? Is there a way that they could widen or straighten or what have you, because I see a complete bottleneck jam up and a lot of unhappy people.
Are you talking about with the dump trucks?
Yes, and all of the other excavation that will be going on in and out.
I think that was approached with the other entrance to that.
Well, I think,
Essentially.
let's talk about that in deliberation.
Thank you for your concern. Do you have any other neutral testimony, those not in favor or against?
Dan, can I ask you a question? Because you know a lot about this project, and you are neutral. If there's anything you care to add about it, I don't know if that's appropriate.
I'm not gonna add facts.
Okay.
It's gonna be a conflict of interest. Anyone else, testimony of opposition to the application of this project? The opposition to the project? No. How about the applicant to come up and rebuttal and some clarification of some of those questions, ideas to resolve some of those issues?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add, but I think the option of coming through either the city, this is a city-owned lot here, and then a county-owned lot, as I recall, to the north of that. Definitely at least worth looking at, can't guarantee anything there, but it would be at the mercy, of course, of the city or county agreeing to access through there. I assume we're talking about just for construction purposes. We'd have to modify our EQ 1200C permit, which just got resolved right now. Don't really look at that though. It's a good question. Some of the other things that we do have some level of control over are putting together a traffic plan that would add some level of control. That's my concern, those heavy trucks coming through your neighborhood. And so one of the things we can do is, work with the contractor to help control speeds and that as safe as possible. Of course, no one wants an accident to occur. So, or the bottleneck, there's everything's got pluses and negatives. One plus with those bottlenecks is they do tend to be traffic calming measures that do slow people down. So.
With that amount of traffic on that road, you can't go any slower.
So the question about the sewer capacity of the lift station, it's my understanding in Sharon's response, we had a comment come in earlier, another question about the capacity of that lift station. We have not done an analysis on it. As Jacob mentioned, as part of that detailed design phase, which would come next, that would be scrutinized more carefully. But it's my understanding currently that the city engineering department did state that they don't have concerns over the capacity for the number of lots that we're proposing here. And I believe that station does have a diesel generator backup system there. So that's a pretty good looking, robust modern station. There's some pretty ugly ones in some areas. But, were there any other questions specifically that?
If we start talking about deliberating about sidewalks for like or something like that, how much grief are we gonna give the developer? I mean, see pedestrians walking on the gravel side, that comes up. I mean, just thinking about the traffic and then dedicating the sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for Sean, but my personal opinion on it is that I believe there's other fee structures in place that, or in my opinion, address off-site sidewalks such as that. But I mean, deal with this question obviously on a lot of projects in a lot of different jurisdictions, and yeah, in my opinion, it's just not fair to, because the traffic is people are trying to put housing in place for folks, and there's a point where if you start putting too many of these expenses on the developers, it's not going to happen.
I know that.
For community travel.
It's just that he's got a great development there and good sidewalks and the whole bit. And you go through the section there, it's just like,
yeah,
disconnected, but.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would hope that that's what some of the other pieces are collected with.
I think there was a question about potential mitigation of runoff and there was a concern raised about that.
With regard to the storm
Water.
sure. So that's probably the thing that we've taken the most extensive look at so far. And the approach on that is to this overall system and with no greater outfall than is the current situation. So we've got several different storm facilities proposed that are going to detain and treat the storm water. Or when you put in hard surfaces like we're doing here, runoff occurs at a greater rate. And so to counter that, we put in storm swales, ponds basically that detain the water for a certain amount of time, biologically treat it with plants, and then meter the outflow. So that theoretically that outfall is at no greater rate than the current condition. The added complexities with this particular design is we have to also maintain the health of not only the existing wetlands that are going to remain, but some created wetlands that we're going to be building to mitigate the impact, which are much less than they were with the original design, but we are still proposing some impacts to wetlands that need to be mitigated. And that's a pretty complex committee process through the Oregon Department of State Lands and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers federal level. Closely monitored, and as it goes with that process, we're creating more wetlands that are disturbing, and it's one that for us personally, I'll say it's in our community. You know, we've got an ecological division of our company ourselves now. We're not the wetland ecologist on this project. We have a really experienced consultant that we're working with that's handling that side of the project. But we're personally going to take ownership in this as well. We know that, like Dan mentioned, we've got some local eyes and ears that we'll be keeping an eye on. So all of us want this to be a success, and we're going to personally make sure that it is a success and that it doesn't create any problems for adjacent properties. You're concerned, I believe we are dodging that hill, that trail should come into the south of that, but we'll make sure. And we are proposing screening along that trail as well to help protect the adjacent properties from that pedestrian traffic that it's going to see. Okay.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what you just said. Your stormwater facilities, mitigation areas, you're going to have a step down design. It will slow the water down, so it's going to pull off the site maybe even slower than before. So it's project, except for the impervious surfaces, will likely have runoff off the project slower than it does now. And what it does now is it flows into that swale, it's a stream, and then it goes subsurface, then it pumps back up again. So during high winter flows, the stormwater of a large portion of the northern St. Helens goes through this area. But it won't change, the development won't change on the back it's coming from.
Any other questions for us?
Good question, Andrew, which is off of all of this, but the streets within the plan are gonna be 34 wide. What I'm looking at, is there gonna be any on-site parking on these lots? I'm reading this, no, they'll be on streets.
On site.
On.
Which sheet that cross sections on, Chase?
Yeah, there's no exception, they're required, there's no exception to the parking requirement. The off-street parking requirements still stand.
So that the driveways will be put in
Yeah.
as they do it, because it was sounded in here like it was as each person decided they wanted.
Oh, it may have been, there's a lot, it just may have,
Yeah, think.
may have been. The volume.
I was pressing leaves all week. Yeah, no, I was just curious, the way I read it, it was like.
And there was, one of their sheets showed driveway and stuff. So it is contemplated in there if you kind of bury through everything, but there's no exception from off-street parking requirements.
So the 4-foot side yard is wide enough for a carport?
The side yard is the distance from the side property line to any building or structure. So,
Right, no, I understand.
so it's the, you're still gonna have a garage or carport or just a pad.
Okay, so the pad will be in place.
Yeah. Like I said, off-street parking is not exempt.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
So my one question, I don't know if this is where I ask it, is on the stormwater facility. It says it's gonna remain within the homeowners association. Will they be policing themselves, or who makes sure that that is maintained like it should be? Does the state look at that, or who looks at that?
So it's my understanding the state will just be looking at the performance of the created wetlands. I don't want to speak for.
We're talking about storm.
The stormwater,
Facility, yeah, I'm just wondering, it says that it will remain, it says it will remain within the HOA.
yeah, so it's my understanding that the ultimate responsibility will be on the applicant to maintain those facilities. I don't think, in my experience, the city's not gonna be going out and inspecting those systems once it leaves the street. The portion of the storm sewer system within the street will be the city's. Once it gets into the swales, the off-city property, that will be the applicant's responsibility. And in my experience, the city wouldn't get involved unless there was a nuisance issue. If something was failing and water was flowing over a street somewhere, of course, that would, it's gonna be brought to everybody's attention, and everyone's gonna look at the applicant and say, your system's not working right. With the design issue, he's gonna look at us and say, hey.
In the past, the city took over those right, like Ridge Crests.
It depends. It depends. Depends on the circumstance. We do have some.
I'll say, I think it's the proper appropriate way of storm drainage design. We're utilizing the on-site water to do what it was previously doing, and I think in a better job actually of feeding and nourishing the wetlands that aren't, in my opinion anyway, in that great shape currently. I think it's going to be a net benefit to the property. But
It had to be designed to DEQ standards for treatment.
Did they look at any impact on Dalton Lake when they did all these studies, since it's not super far away?
well, what DEQ is looking at is that we are meeting appropriate setbacks, that the water quality component is there, so that when the water does get to Dalton Lake, it's been properly treated in those swales. So the two main things that those swales are here to do is biologically meet the quality standards so that you don't have water getting to Dalton Lake that's polluted from runoff from the streets, and then the volumetric control as well to make sure that water's not getting to Dalton Lake or any upstream properties at any greater rate than it currently is.
And then my other, what is a blow off? It says a blow off shall be installed at the end of the water main. What is that?
So if you have a dead end water main, there's going to be an air pocket there, and so have block gives you the ability to move that water.
Could move that image up a little bit. The other way.
Oh. Yeah.
And over.
To the left.
Yeah, there we go. So, Andrew, the stormwater facility in that corner.
This one?
You didn't mention is that DEQ requires you to treat all the water that's going off of your site. Sometimes means you have to treat the water coming on your site. And that's a tough pill to swallow if it's not been treated by some other development. And that's the case here, where there's a lot of water coming off of 10th Street, and 9th Street, and even, I don't know about 8th Street, I can remember that. But and off of the county property onto this property, pipes just sticking out there. And they've got to treat that. That was a
And the alternation water was just looked at as a nuisance. You just put it in the pipe and got rid of it to where it wouldn't cause any problems. But the more appropriate modern approach to it is you manage it responsibly. And so, as Dan mentioned, we're inheriting this, whatever you want to call it, previous, someone else's was just getting rid of it. This was the convenience spot to get rid of it. And so this is just one of many examples, in my opinion, where this project is cleaning up something that's currently less than ideal. So we're going to be taking that relatively high volume of water that's coming in from these 3 pipes that you see right here and going to treat it and manage it, use it to help nourish these wetlands down in this area.
Thank you.
Questions? Any questions? Okay, thank you. Here, no further questions of the commission, from the commission, no further responses from staff. Public record is closed. This matter is returned to the table for deliberations and oral decision. Know the crowd though.
Except Matt, he's picking it out, he's staying to the very end. He must make sure he's not getting stepped on.
No, I'm not worried about it. I know where to find you.
So, drawing out the audience and involve, just like hearing's not close, so. We're gonna chat up here and you can listen in. So, where do we start?
Well, so based on the testimony and the way the staff report is structured, the conditions that are kind of, well, these could go either way. They really have to do with the 10th Street connection and offsite improvements to 8th and 9th Street. So if your decision, any modifications to the decision is just based on that, the motion can be really easy. Focus on those as approved by, as recommended by staff, and then based on the discussion, we can tweak the conditions. Now, if we verge beyond those subject matters, we'll have to be a little more detailed about our conclusions.
I'd like to add the construction entrance.
Yeah, so that would, we can't force someone else's property from the county or city.
Why not?
Yeah, as taxpayers, we own part of that street.
Yeah, it's the city council's property as property owner. But I think if you wanted to include that, we could certainly put it in as a recommendation.
I think it could be. One thing, when you develop and you're going through these 2 residential streets with all the construction, if you could ease his life, all the people are gonna be up in arms. If you can come in through the side there.
Well, yeah, that's a common source of complaints for new subdivisions is construction traffic. And then when it's done, oh, look at how beat up our road is. So there's a public benefit too.
Right.
If there's just a gravel area that's gonna absorb the damage better, hey, that's great.
Well, I guess I'd like to make a recommendation, and so have the county and the city look at that we recommend that go through their property.
You want to do one of the.
Whether he does it or not.
You want it as one of the conditions that it's looked at?
That's looked at.
Yeah.
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 Offered by the city and county.
Yeah. City and or.
We don't know where,
And or.
we don't know where it's gonna turn it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's
It's looked at.
There's some topography issues.
Definitely fair game. It's a recommendation for a catalyst of future discussion. Yep.
Also, the traffic issues, right?
Well, that's one item down.
No, there was like how many pages of
On the list.
conditions. That's reading on it.
I see we're supportive of number 1 conclusion. recommendation. Picking out the easy ones.
So do you,
Let's do 10th Street.
yeah, let's do 10th Street, that's a good idea. So, and in talking about 10th Street, you know, there's thinking about 8th and 9th, like I said, if there's a pedestrian connection to 10th Street, or pedestrians, does that alleviate your any potential concern about 8th and 9th? But yeah, 10th Street. I guess we gotta see where you're at with that. So, and you know, I kind of anticipated the kind of testimony we did get. It is a epic of a subdivision as far as its construction costs and such. But there was no opposition to the right-of-way dedication, which I didn't expect that. And the pedestrian connection, I didn't think there would be for that, because it's a easier thing to design. And talking about streets, you know, there was some concern. And how y'all feeling on that?
I feel like with the configuration of this area down here, even if you punched a road over there, it's gonna be kind of so on the edge and off to the side. Who's gonna go there? Might give me the path of least resistance where you say, wiggles.
Gonna wipe out several lots too.
Yeah, that too.
A lot of lots.
We
The
gain,
pedestrian one, I agree with that, we're going the easement that's there. And seems to whatever the stormwater area, and then we're right on the 10th. I don't think just pedestrian, no traffic.
I need a boardwalk.
Well, that'd be fine, yeah, wetland boardwalk that the whole time.
I don't think that's gonna solve any of the issues from people walking down 8th Street. I don't know, I guess I find it hard to believe they're gonna walk all the way across and cut through that pedestrian area to get to the highway. So you're still having issues down.
The majority of your lots coming to that corner. So.
My thoughts on the 10th Street, whether it's we eliminate some lots. I think that the developer actually has a very, very reasonable proposal as far as dealing with a lot of wetland issues and mitigation, and they've offered to install a public trail which can connect down to the public trail to Dalton Lake. The developer's already taking on a lot of expense to try to mitigate stormwater runoff and making sure that the water that does come off this is treated as it can be. So I think adding a lot, I don't think adding the additional burden of a street. Just don't see a lot of additional benefit to the flow of traffic. I think the natural flow is still going to go down the street. Adding that additional expense to the developer, it's just not going to create enough mitigation to add that extra burden on the developer to add that street there versus the alley or the pedestrian walkway. In light of all the other burdens the developer is taking on in order to develop this challenging here. What I think on 10th Street
What do you think?
Road.
Pedestrian path.
I think the pedestrian path is a good idea. That's good. Have extra access for people to get out of the area if they need to walk out of the area if an additional pedestrian areas. Fence, I didn't hear the developer say that was something that was unreasonable.
Are there any current sidewalks?
There is on 8th, it kind of explains it with diagram. So the new subdivision in the neighborhood is what was formerly known as Eagle Lakes Bluff. And we do have sidewalks there. And in fact, this is the standard 34-foot wide street, except right here it narrows down, just that little point there. So 8th, which is the longest distance between the subject property and Deer Island Road, at least a portion does have the sidewalk. But then the rest of it, you get down to this 23-foot wide of pavement with gravel shoulders. At least you do have gravel shoulders here.
Sidewalks along here too, along the apartment complex.
Thank you, Jenny. There is a private sidewalk. Well, it's in the right of way that kind of goes like this. And that just shows why 10th is a little bit more favorable for pedestrians, because you have a little bit of a walkway here. This area is narrower, but there's not really any driveway approaches. And then up here where there are a lot of driveway approaches, I mean, geez, it's 40 feet or wider of pavement.
If you're not familiar, Lamont Street is not a road. There.
I just was stops at 6th Street.
Well, actually, extend a little bit more.
Well, across the street.
Third.
Did they pay?
1 block to the west. Very narrow.
I'm just trying to maybe address what you were saying about pedestrians on there, but I have issues with putting that on the backs of the developers, that they put sidewalks in established areas already, so.
I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
There was one instance where we did have that,
Yankee Road.
Hankey Road, for some of you who've been around here a long time. Elk Ridge, this was several years ago now, but Elk Ridge was starting to blow up. And there's one way to get into town, and that's on Hankey Road. It's already a narrow county road. And so it was a condition to install the sidewalks, and there wasn't any resistance. Of course, when it was in bankruptcy, when someone was purchasing the property, we told them up front, this is a very real condition, so it wasn't a surprise. But that was, the circumstances there were pretty extreme. If that helps.
Anything else about 10? So it sounds like we're all leaning towards pedestrian pathway, a right of way easement dedication, that's what I'm trying to say. And that's just for if the city county property were to develop, the road could continue on.
Yes.
Right.
The right of way dedication's there, 100 years, 50 years, 200 years. It's there to be extended.
What else are we going to tackle?
So another item that we kind of addressed, I just want to make sure that like you've discussed it, are the offsite improvements. We talked about street, you got into the offsite improvements, the 9th or 8th and 9th. It doesn't sound like there's much drive to want to require any of that. It's the last call for that discussion, just to make sure you're all firing on the same.
Talking about the sidewalks on either.
Yeah.
I think again, that burden on the developers probably, I don't, although it might be desirable, maybe something the city could look at in the future, but it sounds like the developer already has a lot of challenges with this site. Lots of money to get
It would be nice, but it's not his burden.
Yeah. The city of St. Helens has very few sidewalks in this part of town.
And there's no sidewalks in Deer Island either.
And 9th Street's pretty wide, so it's not a street.
And at least with opening up 10th, it does give you a lot of people that other option.
Right.
So it's not being ignored, it's just attempting to find the minimal solution that helps.
It seems to me that it's more likely that pedestrians are gonna walk towards town than away from town. Don't see a lot of people walking down the sidewalk on the highway, they're gonna wanna go downtown, so they're more likely to go towards 8th Street and shorten that.
Towards
Towards-
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, the transit center essentially.
yeah, that's gonna be.
So right now, based on the discussion, we have the recommendation for county and city property for construction access, and then for 10th Street to have that northerly dedication, and for the connection to 9th to be via a pedestrian pathway. And it's possible that if that's all the issues, that could be folded into a motion, and then otherwise as recommended by staff.
So then, going back to my original concern about the overlay, we have no opportunity to ask specific questions about the development, about side yards or.
Oh, yeah, that would probably be good to bring up during the public hearing. I mean, we can certainly talk about it. It's in the record. The thing is, our code says you could just not have a standard at all. And they elected to have a smaller standard. And so whether or not you could attack the standards, you know, I think it'd be a tough one. Would you like to talk about the standards they propose?
Well, I just.
A lot of it's on that table.
Yeah,
What standard is?
The one that's concerning me is minimum side yards where residential zoning, 5 foot for interior lots and 10 foot for sides and corner lots becomes 4 foot on all sides. I'm looking at the table.
Yeah, it was 4 feet that I read.
So now one thing about that 4 feet on all sides, on corner lots, you're still gonna have a public utility easement that is greater than 4 feet. And so that's gonna keep buildings, and there's not a lot of corner lots, but that's gonna keep buildings further away from the corner sides. And the normal side setback is 5 feet, and they're only reducing it by 1. So it could be a lot more extreme.
Size going down to, they're choosing, proposed is 3690 square feet for detached single family. That's the standard they get to set, if I'm understanding it.
Yes, and they could say there is no standard. Now, I recommend that there is a standard just because it's less chaos in the future. I always have to think about, okay, well, it gets built, but then, you know, we're dealing with it forever, right? And having had to deal with other planned developments, and you're trying to figure out what in the heck did they approve? That's why I'm a stickler about having these tables in there. That way it's easier for planners of the future to know what the heck planners of the present were doing. So
Being a real estate broker for almost 30 years and seeing HOAs are only as good as their boards, right? They, as their police. So you look at, I mean, I have a hard time not looking at the future of the neighborhood. So things like where it says their private area, each structure will have an outdoor private area greater than 48 square feet.
Oh, so that, some of the criteria that the applicant addressed don't even apply. Yeah, that's a multi-dwelling standard. This isn't a multi-dwelling development. That could have just been crossed out or whited out, and it would have made no impact on the fate of the application.
Is that red leaf by the DMV?
That was the subdivision formerly known as Red Leaf, now it's called Greystone Estates.
Well, I was gonna say Greystone, but anyway, after driving through that a couple of weeks ago, 4 feet sounds airy to me. I mean, you know, 4 feet, you can't touch the wall.
Yeah.
Over there, you're lucky if you squeeze through. Yeah, whatever it is.
I probably should ask this of Andrew when he was up earlier, but, so plan that you've been presented to develop the numbers, there's only one plan, there's no, were you given alternatives of street design that, you know, something different that would have addressed, like, the traffic study showing all this traffic going down 9th. If this was rearranged a little bit, so 8th is the major street, 9th is just a little side thing going off the side, and more traffic might go down 8th. And the question is when you come up with a traffic study and shows all this traffic go down 9th, does that beg the question, does this need to be redesigned so it spreads the traffic out a little bit more?
Sure, I mean, that, and that's where I was kind of talking about.
Is not
what we do with 10 and, yeah, and 9th, just as we talked about in the variance, it's the brunt of the traffic. Over the years that we've been dealing with, I know the first plans, we had Northwest Engineers on it. The second design firm was Westlake, and then finally Lower Columbia. And, you know, I saw the plan evolve over time. And this last one, we got it, and then, okay, well, how do we make this work? And okay, well, we can make this work potentially with a subdivision, a plan development, a subdivision variance, and 3 cents in a land permit. So it was partly, I mean, this last one was partly us reacting to that, but that was based on occasional meetings that occurred throughout the years with other people. But that's that's no, basically, no. We did not have alternatives.
I mean, I'm not encouraging any additional wetland impacts.
But some of a lot of the older plans did extend 8th Street. It extended the block.
Yeah.
And I think,
I've seen them all, but.
yeah, you've seen them, and just in trying to minimize the wetland impacts, they gave that up and went with a cul-de-sac.
We had no testimony from anybody that lived on 9th Street that had any concerns about traffic down their street. Everybody that was here was at 8th Street.
Yeah.
I thought for sure.
I mean, the loop would have solved the fire problem and the sprinkler need and stuff like that. I think in this case, they were playing a game of tug of war with all these different regulations, right? And then which, who has the muscle? And I think in this case, DSL and Army Corps were on steroids as far as arm wrestling or.
I will insert one thing. It was the developer that chose this plan. It was not forced by the state or federal government.
I wasn't involved with
They chose
that.
it because they wanted less mitigation.
Yeah.
Fire sprinklers are expensive.
44 lots of them. There's 44 lots that will be sprinkled.
Well, because if you look at where does the single access begin, and that's north of where 8th intersects 9th. And the majority of your lots are beyond that just because of the layout, so.
Preventing another Crestwood Village where you can't.
Yeah, Crestwood at least has that emergency access off Madrona.
I know there's some topography issues. I want to ask Andrew a question, but I can't really. Of getting an emergency access into the manufactured home park to the north, that take out a unit, whatever. If those ever considered. How you would ever do that in adjacent development that It's already developed.
Yeah, well, you would stub to it. Have a street stub, and that, that doesn't get you the access immediately, but it prepares you for it. Now, Crestwood, it's not that old of a manufactured home park, and I imagine it's gonna be there for a long time, but, we have to think long-term. But I will say that our transportation system plan does have, future street networks identified. And Crestwood is shown on that network, but where that street is, it's talking about taking Oregon and looping it to Madrona up here. There's a little little street stub beyond the border. So there was no street connection shown in the transportation systems plan. And that's why we didn't, I didn't talk about trying to stub to Crestwood.
My question is, if they were to show a stub, would that preclude them having to have sprinklers?
No, because they would have to stub and then negotiate with the manufactured home park to take out a lot so they could connect with the private street system.
Not just a stub.
Yeah, it's a stub
Be
and
a real access.
yeah, because
Real fires happen.
Yeah.
and fire apparatuses don't fly.
No.
And they don't jump. So until that time, we need a continuous road.
Find a solution there for Sean.
I mean, I did think about that and kind of going through the report, but because, and stubbing to Crestwood, but just.
Topography issues too.
Yeah.
So we're okay with the rest of this. As far as we can tell. Few things thrown in there like a new sign, a monument sign, or required sign permit. Shouldn't propose that.
They talk about it. They talk about having entry signs, and they actually identify them there. You can see the little easement. And so we just said, yeah, that's cool. Need a sign permit.
Okay. Nothing special there. Anybody else have anything to see? Yes, sir, we will, ready to make a motion.
There were two methods that we were supposed to decide between one.
No, that's in my discussion of the staff report, I talked about that House bill that says we have to provide the option to allow the final plat to get recorded before all public improvements are completed. And so that's why, because of that state law, that condition used to be a little more simpler. But now we have, the old way of doing things was just completing everything, and then the option that we're obligated by state law to provide. And that's what's reflected in that condition.
So you didn't really talk about it, but all the sensitive land permits are impacts to buffers to the wetlands. Is that correct?
That's correct, not to the wetlands themselves. And a lot of those are from the logging activity. The new one is the sewer line and the pedestrian path.
So it's catching up the previous.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened is, so there was the logging stuff. We went out there and go, oh man, so some bad stuff happened. And so what we worked with the applicant to figure out what the impacts to the city was. And then, okay, great, we know that now. We'll tackle that when the subdivision happens. So I just had to remember it And then the stuff from that time period is all the material. So it was kind of delayed. All right, we won't turn this into an active enforcement case. We'll just resolve it with the subdivision. Because that was the efficient thing to do. And they were cooperative. There wasn't need to get messy.
We have a motion. To include the treatment around 10th Street. Did you, when Audrey was asking about parking, there's on-street parking everywhere.
And all the streets are standard 34-foot wide roadways. So it's gonna have on-street parking on both sides. The limitation will be, driveways.
Yeah.
Space between driveways. But in some places you won't have any driveways. So that will help. The one thing that we didn't talk about, and I just want to mention, we've gone through a lot of these subdivisions and we have people concerned about the wildlife that won't be there anymore. And in this case, because of that vast open space that they're gonna preserve, look how many people's backyards are gonna, it's the envy of many people's backyards.
I don't think we have to worry about that. I almost hit a deer on the way here. The garbage yard.
Well, see, this gives them a place that's not on the road.
So if we hit them, we take them over there.
I did not say that.
Take them home now.
You can, yeah.
I'll make a motion. We move with the addition of 10th Street pedestrian access, and the possibility of construction access for the project.
Dedicated right away. Is 10th Street.
Yeah, dedicated right away.
I'll second that.
Say enough.
Did you hear that? Did I cover everything? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Carried.
And authorize the issues of signature.
Oh, so moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so what that second part was, so normally, if they didn't do that, we would come back at the next meeting with the findings, and they would all look at it and go, okay, that's cool. That adds a month, right? And I know you've been anxious, you were anxious about this back in 2006.
2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Years ago. This way, the chairman can look at it, make sure it's how it was, and then just sign it right away. So it just buys time.
City have to.
Come down and sign it, couple days.
First.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's one of the conditions is that there is a planned overlay effect.
Right.
And right now there isn't because the city council still has to approve that.
Right.
So that's something that needs to
If you don't
happen.
approve it, we come back.
And you don't have
with a
to
different
sign
sign.
anything.
Yeah, so if something happens with that condition still stays, they could, reapply if there was some legal technicality. You try to address that, or create a design without the plan development.
Will we see it on the 6th?
So I should make sure that I read this last part. The final written decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the city council. The notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who testified or submitted comments, and the appeal deadline will be included in the notice. Now for the previous vote. Signature vote.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Jacob, it wasn't 2 years ago, it was $2 million ago.
Oh, $2 million.
It's on April 6th. The public hearing before council.
After the login. We were just.
that wetland word.
There's a lot of stuff. So
Go back to the thing that's more data.
Okay, you want
Little plants here.
we have his proposal there.
Anyway.
Here. In the interest of the late hour, let's, we can discuss a little bit more. But if we could keep it down.
Well, no, I don't like you to have some discussion. I think we should. I think.
We'll keep everybody's, these people are paid, and keep their mind on their time. So late then.
Well, I think to wrap, it's just, I think what's envisioned now is that tonight we would simply resolve to be a proactive planning commission. That's it. And then we would just decide that's what we're gonna do. How we're gonna do it, we're gonna figure that out. What we're gonna take on, we're gonna figure that out later. And then, and I think some of the concerns are, you know, there were some discussions about extra meetings. I don't think that's gonna be part of it. I think we're gonna talk about meeting in subcommittee and coming back and discussing whether it's things that the planning commission would like to take on. Part of being a proactive planning commission is the meeting we're gonna have next week. So we're moving in this design process, and we're gonna have a discussion with the city next week with the people. Additionally, we are in the budget cycle, and I think a recommendation from the planning commission, at least an encouragement to the city to in the next fiscal year's budget, which is going to be, I'm not sure if we're going to meet before the next council meeting in April when we're going to be discussing budget, but to have a recommendation that the city strongly consider budgeting for an additional staff member to the planning department. And then the last, since we're discussing budget, is also to request the city to provide the planning commission for a budget of $25,000 to be able to hire and people that we may feel need to do studies, things like that. And those would be just kind of general 3 items. So I suppose if people don't want to discuss it, I'm prepared to make a motion.
I just have one suggestion. If I want to be sure that we're not finding a solution to a problem I don't even know what I mean by that is one of the first tasks would be identifying those things that the city could use some help with. Not just, we want to do stuff, you know, we want to do stuff that's going to be helpful. So the city manager might already have a job we thought we wanted to do, already well in hand. Planning department may have all the things we thought we wanted to do already well in hand. But there may be some things that they just can't get to that we could help out with, and we may be willing to do that depending on what they are. That's the kind of forward work that I would want to see before we say, yeah, let's be proactive without knowing anything of what we want to do. What is it that we need to do, that we can do, that we should do, that is not stepping on someone else's job?
Well, it's not staying on their job, it's being more active in what the city that we're not involved with. They're making plans.
Yeah.
We don't get involved.
We're
We're a planning commission.
Yeah.
What's the word?
Yeah.
Well, no, what you're suggesting, Dan, I mean, being proactive itself. I mean, that in a sense is already being proactive if you're doing what you're suggesting about dialoguing with. So I think that I understand it as being a proactive step.
That's what I think of proactive.
Yeah.
Be active in a purposeful way. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I add a little something to this? I know I'm going out as of December, but take into consideration when you're going to need new members. They're probably going to not be retired. You want to get rid of some of the old folks. But consider they not only have
jobs themselves, most likely. They also have families to deal with. They have other workings besides donating their time to planning commission. Planning commission has not overstepped the bounds of family life as far as that goes, because it's only one night a month, generally. I have been on it long enough that we've had more than one night. And it does start to become a hardship once it gets past the regular session. You're into 3 sessions. Project. So take that into consideration when you're trying to push the planning commission as a go-getter to do more active. I have no problems with the planning commission being more active, helping the city with what we can help them with. But I don't think we need to take on more necessarily than that. And that's my reason. I mean, my particular situation, I have a 15-year-old living in my house, I have a 45-year-old living in my house, and I have a 77-year-old living in my house. And I'm up there with the oldest one. I'm still basically raising a family because I'm fixing dinners for all of them every day. I'm cooking. I'm retired. I had a job on top of that. Still do.
I can appreciate that. That's why I was hesitant
Take
about it.
into consideration what you're putting on somebody that, like when I step down, when anybody else steps down, you're gonna have to replace them with somebody that is able, let alone willing, to put the time. And if you start bogging that down, you're not gonna have people that are willing to do this job. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind while you're doing this. I just want to state it.
And I think that's something that was discussed, and that is, how do we're gonna transition, let's say, maybe it's not that much of a transition, who knows, it's really, and like Dan said, what family, exactly.
And I appreciate that. I mean, it's why I hesitated of wanting to be involved, but it's last 6 months I hadn't had the bandwidth to add anything more, period. So, work my next to get, I wouldn't be able to do anything more.
Spend hours and hours on this thing, trying to get ready for this hearing.
I appreciate that.
I do too.
I mean.
But I still think subcommittees could take on smaller projects.
Yeah, and that's their
I mean,
decision.
it doesn't mean that 7 people have to totally be involved. It could be 3, it could be 4.
As long as you can get
But at
rid of-
least I would vote for it to see where it could go.
I really appreciate what you're saying, but I also think that's the exact reason we became the planning commission that we are, because there wasn't a lot of volunteers that could do anymore. And so it's interesting that 3 of the people that are, all 3 of us are still working in the core, so, but the 3 subcommittee, the 3 of us still have full-time jobs. So it is challenging. I don't feel like I have qualifications to make certain decisions, but I'd like to be included in just knowing what's going on and have the opportunity to have input if, you know.
So one of the issues is inclusion.
Yeah, that's it.
I heard that from Russ, and so,
Yeah.
and I think that was heard. I mean, we have this joint session coming up with the
Start.
yeah.
So I think the idea was initially, and this is not anything in stone, but it was something like the people who are interested in becoming more proactive say, hey, these are some issues we'd like to have the planning commission look at, concerns, and bring it up and say, well, is this something the city needs help with? And then if the answer is yes, the city, what our charter says, or what the law says, that we're supposed to make a recommendation to city council and helping them move forward with decisions they're working on. And the idea is to augment the council as a citizen body and helping the council make important decisions and moving forward with what it's doing. And so the idea would be, and this is nothing I'm asking for a vote on tonight. This is just sort of an outline of those who want that they would say, well, is this something we want to look at as a commission? And then a discussion, maybe like on an agenda item, and well, why should we do it? Is this something the city wants help with? Maybe the city, once we become more of a proactive commission, may say, well, we'd like to give this to the planning commission to look at and come back in 6 months with a recommendation. They can study it, and then they can come back to us with a recommendation. We can take some of the burden off of the political end, if you would. But the idea is initially to first say, yeah, we're going to be proactive. Then the second thing is, well, how do we structure this? How do we do it? And then the pencil outline was, let's say we want to take on an issue and we decide this is something we'll want to look at. And then we decide how we want to look at it. And then maybe the subcommittee goes and looks at it, comes back, we do a study, who knows, whatever the commission decides, we look at it, come back, we look at it as a body, decide, do we have enough to make a decision? Enough to make a recommendation? And that was the initial thought.
I'm very open to looking at it as a body once the research has been done, those that have time to do the legwork and bring it so we can all talk about it and we can, have an hour, whatever, some meeting that we're not too busy.
I'm not against the planning commission taking on some more.
Yeah.
But take into consideration what the individuals on the planning commission have on their plate already. And don't wind up getting so gung-ho that you wind up killing the opportunities of having people on the planning commission. Because of
It's a valid point, very valid stuff.
Well, maybe it shifts, maybe some type, the committees change around, like, I don't have any more time this month to do anything, maybe you do, or, because we have to stay under a quorum anyway, right, so it can only.
it could only be 3 vacations.
Yeah, we'll travel, that's right.
But I think, you put up a list of dreams projects to do if you ever get to them, right? You do at the end of the year.
Yeah, it's in the strategic plan.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of things that we can pick at and ask, how important is that dream thing item you never got to, number Q, whatever.
If you look at the list, Steve and I were going over it
Yeah,
last night. There's different projects there that could be worked on.
And have to be close, close connection with the council and planners to know what's useful, what a make our time useful. So we'll have to coat.
Sidewalk.
All right.
So I do have
make
a
a
couple
motion.
motions to make. So the first would be that we will resolve, I make a motion, we resolve to be a proactive planning commission in addition to the duties that we're doing. It's simply a resolution.
One second. Yeah, you gotta vote on it.
I'm in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
I just want to realize.
I'm in favor of the concept for sure.
Okay, and then And then I would request that, that the subcommittee be formed, the proactive subcommittee, since we're chipping away at it. That we come back to the planning commission with proposals to discuss how we could be a proactive planning commission or additional, but we would look into how other planning commissions work and have a structure of how it could work. And that would be the second proposal.
In favor of that. Gives an outline so people know what.
Right, because I think
Yeah.
Dan, well, Dan said, it's
But
like,
does it
well,
need to be a motion?
does it need to be a motion? Okay, I move that we form a
Well, no,
subcommittee.
I'm asking if it needs to be.
No,
I don't think it does.
General
I
agreement.
think you can have a sub, yeah, I thought that was
All right, so we have an
part of
understanding.
the first one.
All right, so we're gonna keep chipping away at it. come back
Yeah.
and talk next time. And then, okay, so then as far as the next motion is concerned, because we do have a budget cycle and I admire and respect the job that our planning department is doing. And I think now is the time to ask for money and for resources for our planning department. And I make a motion that we make a recommendation to the city council that they seriously consider adding an additional staff person to the planning department beginning this fiscal year.
I think that's premature, because we don't even know what we're doing. We have to identify
Well, there's no
what we're,
definition either.
what we're doing, what would be needed.
They've already demonstrated to us, though, that they are one planner short according to the population.
Right, they need, our population's getting to the point, there was a presentation last week that there should be another planner anyway, and
That's one for every 5,000 and how many
Be another policeman.
population?
Yeah, that's the,
There's
it's
all
gonna be a tough budget year.
Yeah.
It is, but I think there's still value and
Yes.
the planning commission wants to
I think it should be put.
make that recommendation, not that it's gonna happen, it'll still be part of the whole discussion, but I do think it's
It'll be for discussion.
appropriate to make that
As an
recommendation.
alternative, can we ask that you look into interns? I mean, I don't know what that puts on your guys' plate, but if we can't have a paid staff, can we?
Somebody like that, Jen.
More work.
It's
Interns, yeah.
that can be good and bad.
Yeah.
But it does mean you manage it. And we've had experiences that have been great and other ones that have been like, God help us. So it's yeah, Jenny, when she first started as
asked for it this year.
my intern.
Quasi intern.
If you ask for a budget, you don't qualify what it's really gonna be used for, I mean, that's.
Well, I think.
Well,
it would-
What would you think would be, what resources would the planning department like? I mean, if you were to have your wish, what would you like to have?
Like I tell John Walsh, with two of us, I mean, there's some proaction, right? But it's limited. And what I tell John is, we can keep up with the work, although sometimes, we have to burn the midnight oil like on this one. A lot of February was used up on this. I finally got through my February emails this week because of the backup from this. And that's gonna happen. And this may be the most complex one we see all year. But what I tell John is, we were able to be reactive and keep up with things, but if you want us to be more proactive, that's when we need a person.
What would be that person's title?
Oh, that's easy. It would be an assistant planner.
Okay, I can make a motion that we make a recommendation to the city council that they seriously consider hiring an associate.
Assistant.
Assistant.
We have assistant associate city.
I'll second that.
I'll second.
Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, that's easy. We've talked about it.
Well, I think it's
Easy.
good that it comes from the planning commission, that we are recognizing the work that you are doing. And that the feedback we're getting is we need more resources and we're the citizen body that is assisting the city to plan. And it's a very important function. And we are moving forward with our city. Our city is growing and we need resources. And I think they're important and they should take a priority. And you can put that in the minutes.
But I just want to say, that I think we need to end the meeting. And in the future, when you as subcommittee have something you want to bring to the council, that it be on the agenda and not for the information item section. That should be for pretty short, items, 5 minutes or maybe 15 minutes at the most.
Discussion items,
Just
put it in there.
if there is a spot, but that's part of the agenda. It's just to respect people's time. You look at the agenda, you go, okay, this is gonna be a late night. Or this is gonna be an easy night, and then boom, for your information time, and we're spending an hour and a half talking about something. That's a surprise people don't wanna have.
So like subcommittee report on House Bill 1122.
Yeah.
And it should go
Okay.
through Christina, which relays to us, she's preparing packets,
So
so that has.
it might be that you look at it and you go, this is a really full agenda, this is not the best time. So try to be selective and strategic about it, and maybe get an idea how much time you think this meeting is gonna be. Because, we just don't want 11:30 at night meetings just because you threw it in there accidentally for information. I mean, just that kind of surprise, I'm not gonna be very supportive of. I'm gonna try to cut you down, to shut it up. You just gotta move on, you gotta respect people's time.
I think next meeting will be shorter. Right now, the things we have is a presentation from our engineering folks and their consultants on the water master plan. So they presented the storm and sewer, now it's the water. And then probably a variance for another city lot that we're selling.
And the Marine Board discussion, which I haven't talked to Jacob about.
Oh.
But that it's a discussion item, 20 minutes.
Okay, well, maybe it's not as short as I thought.
But, so hour and a half,
That
maybe
was,
2 hours. The variance is simple.
So it's comparatively shorter.
right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
The one that we were